Sup folks, welcome to the part 12, of What If Deku Become a Healer Hero, Chapter 32. Consciousness comes back to him slowly, awareness beginning with a curious ache in his heavy muscles, an unfamiliar fatigue and pain that isn't usually there. Muffled voices tickle his brain, filtering through his ears as if they're stuffed full of cotton. He can't even begin to process what they're saying. It takes a long moment for his mind to come to the conclusion that he should probably be confused, maybe even concerned. This isn't the usual environment he's used to waking up in. Opening his eyes is a lot harder than it should be. His eyelids stick together with an unusual amount of morning mucus and dried up tears. Did he cry last night? When he finally manages to pry them apart, he immediately wishes he hadn't. The League of Villains gather around a TV watching the morning news as if that's the most casual thing in the world. Shit. Izuku jerks upright, only to groan in pain. Sleeping in such an uncomfortable position in this chair did not do him any favors, and now his muscles, sore from sparring, are making their complaints known. Izuku grimaces, gritting his teeth and glancing down at himself. Looks like his bruises finally darkened overnight too. Well, he's back to the land of the living. Izuku's head snaps back up. His pained groan caught the attention of the villains, who are now looking over at him with various expressions of amusement. His heart sinks to his stomach. It was real, then. He's really been captured by the League of Villains. Sharp, jagged blades piercing his chest, forcing his quirk, tearing his energy away from him. Izuku swallows and forces himself not to tremble under their gazes. Finally, Shigaraki sits at the bar, leaning against the countertop as if he doesn't have a care in the world. He glances over his shoulder at Izuku, a grin curling under his mask. I was starting to worry you were going to miss the fun, little cheat code. I would have woken you up, but Kurogiri said not to. He grumbles the last part petulantly, but it's half-hearted. The warp villain stands behind the bar. I merely assumed he would need as much rest as he could get in order to replenish his depleted energy, Kurogiri says, smooth and rational. Golden eyes surrounded by dark mist land on Izuku. How do you feel? Izuku's tongue lays heavy in his mouth. The question may sound harmless coming from Kurogiri's polite voice, but he knows what it's really asking. Does he feel better enough to heal all for one again? They can't possibly think he's fine already. It's only been a few hours, he hasn't even had anything to eat or drink. He's able to lift his head now more easily, but he can still feel the weariness that drags heavy at his muscles. He stammers, voice thick and heavy, trying to get his still, half-asleep brain to work. Toga starts slapping Shigaraki's arm excitedly, much to the man's displeasure. Tamura-kun, look. The commercials are over. Shigaraki's head swings over to the TV. Perfect? Hey, Kurogiri, turn the TV over to the kid. Twice, Magn, move out of the way. The two immediately obey, moving to clear a path between Izuku and the TV on the counter, the other villains watching him attentively. Then, Shigaraki gets up from the bar stool and saunters over to him. Izuku tenses up as he approaches. His blood-red eyes are bright as they peek out between the fingers of his mask, and there's a lilt in his voice. Shigaraki Tamura is in a good mood. You woke up just in time, cheat code. He says. His voice is a mockery of cheerfulness. Just wait till you see this. You'll get a kick out of it, trust me. His words accelerate the already rampant pounding of Izuku's heart. The freckled boy watches him warily as the villain moves to stand beside him, uncomfortably close. Eyes on the screen, kid, Dabi says. Startled, Izuku turns to blink at the TV in confusion. A moment later, Shigaraki's hands slide over his shoulders, pinkies raised. Listen. Warm breath brushes his ear. Izuku tenses up and the hands press down, as if keeping him in place, as if he could even move in the first place. What with these restraints? Swallowing, Izuku takes a breath and forces himself to pay attention to the screen. Turns out, the muffled voices he heard earlier were from the TV. A news broadcast is playing, and he instantly realizes why the League was so interested in it. As we all know, healers are an extremely important part of the hero community and have been targeted a handful of times in the past, a female news anchor is saying, but in recent decades there has been a significant increase in protection around them. Her face sours. Somehow, hasn't seemed to have gotten the memo. Her feathered co-anchor sitting beside her chirps, since it was announced that they took on a new healer, Midoriya Izuku has been targeted not once, not twice, but 3 times by villains. 4 if you count USJ, although he wasn't specifically targeted then, a third co-anchor says. Oh, don't even get me started on USJ. I can't protect any of their kids, let alone their own healer. Izuku's face goes ashen. Dread creeps down his spine. Beside him, he can practically hear Shigaraki's grin grow larger. The feathered news anchor speaks again. What I don't understand is why they let Midoriya go on this camping trip in the first place. They knew he was being targeted, and their solution is to send him off into the middle of the woods with his classmates. Exactly. Anchor number 3 says, Shigaraki Tamura made a very public attack against him at the mall a mere 2 weeks ago, one I'm sure he's only just barely recovered from. One of the hands on his shoulders twitches. We must conclude that there is some sort of problem with the management of He, the female news anchor says with a tone of decisiveness. Speaking of that attack, that brings me to my next question, what does this League of Villains want with Midoriya? The bird-like anchor hesitates. It ruffles my feathers just to suggest it, but Midoriya just barely escaped with his life from the last attack. The news anchor suddenly become very grave. Oh, Funai-san. We shouldn't think like that. What, they think we're gonna kill him? Spinner asks, wrinkling his nose. Oh no, we wouldn't do that. Toga insists, jumping up from her bar stool, he's so much more fun, alive. After a pause, she turns to Shigaraki with a bright smile and asks, but if we do kill him, can I be the one to do it? Ignoring her, Shigaraki leans his head closer to Izuku's. What did I tell you? Remember what I said yesterday? His grip on Izuku's shoulders tightens slightly. Izuku stares at the TV, willing himself to stay calm. Of course, he should have seen this coming. The most prestigious hero school in Japan just got attacked yet again by the League of Villains and came out for the worse this time. To say that is facing criticism would be an understatement. No doubt Principal Nezu and the rest of the faculty will be working hard to salvage their public image and put the people's mind at ease. But what about Izuku? Surely they'll be working hard to save him too? They'll be too busy saving their own skins to try and save you. Izuku gives himself a mental shake. No, that's not true. He can't let himself believe that. He can't let himself lose hope. There's plenty of heroes clever and capable heroes that he trusts with his life. He needs to remain strong and gather what information he can from the inside. Be the nice, timid healer. He allows himself to quiver ever so slightly beneath Shigaraki's palms. Staring wide-eyed at the TV screen, he swallows and lets out a shaky exhale. Oh. Shigaraki snickers. Is that all you can say? He gives Izuku's shoulders one last squeeze before moving away. The boy stifles a sigh of relief. Shigaraki strides back over to the bar, head raised. Our plan has worked even better than I could have ever imagined. The media is tearing us to shreds and finally we are being taken seriously. No more talk about staying. He leans his elbow against the counter and shoots a grin at his comrades. Finally people are seeing how foolish and pathetic heroes really are. It's about time. Dabi smirks. Izuku feels a flash of anger on behalf of his heroes, but he forces it down to a simmer. He can't let himself react on a whim. Still, it would be suspicious if he didn't give them any fight, so he rasps, "They're not." The villains merely laugh at him, condescending and amused, like he's a small child that just said something particularly stupid. He clenches his jaw and tries not to glare. "Kid, you're naive," Dabi says in a bored tone, You'll see just how pathetic they are when they fail to save you, let alone find you. They'll come, Izuku insists, but his voice gives out and he dissolves into a burst of coughs. Having overused his voice so much during the past few hours has really taken a toll on his mangled throat. Each cough sends sharp stabs of pain shooting through his scarred muscles that makes tears sting his eyes. He tucks his chin into his shoulder as the coughs rattle his whole body. When they're finally over, he's left gasping for breath, throat burning. Something is pressed to his lips. "Drink," Spinner orders. He obeys without a second thought, guzzling down water desperately. He's parched. Running through a burning forest and getting kidnapped by villains will do that to a guy. After a few seconds, he realizes that there's a chance that they could have slipped something into this water, but then again, considering that it's from a plastic bottle, he's probably fine. It's not like he would have much of a choice, anyways. Once he's done with the water, Spinner closes the bottle and tosses it in the trash. Some sarcastic, comedic voice in the back of Izuku's head says something about there not being a recycling bin here. "You know. 'Cause they're villains." "Thanks," he croaks. Spinner's breath hisses between his teeth. "Your voice really sounds like shit, kid." "Thanks," he croaks again, a bit more snidely. "I mean, sounds painful." Twice pipes up, like Mercus. Like a rattlesnake making love with sandpaper. Compress and Spinner share a confused glance. Toga nods like she understands. Izuku doesn't know if he should be offended or not. "It's pulling all our heartstrings to listen to." Twice goes on, clutching his chest as he leans against the bar dramatically. "Not mine. A young innocent healer shouldn't be harmed in such a way. It's his own fault. Shigaraki-kun feels bad about it, right?" He straightens up and suddenly points at said villain. Shigaraki pauses, then narrows his eyes. "I've said it before and I'll say it again, it was his own fucking fault. He's a healer, he should have known damn well of the repercussions." After a moment, he glances over his shoulder at Izuku and sneers, "They make him so clever and you'd think they'd teach their kids to value their lives a bit more," Compress says haughtily, "rather than risk throwing them away the moment they get captured." Izuku presses his lips together. That's not, of course we value our lives," he rasps, voice hoarse and barely audible. "I knew I'd get away with mine." "Yeah, but at what cost?" Dabi arches a brow. "Honestly, I think this whole situation is hilarious. That we were able to get you even after Shigaraki-kun nearly turned you to dust. All it really proves is how weak the heroes really are. And now that we've shown that to society, well, it's only a matter of time before the public turns on them. And it starts with a..." He glances at the TV where the news broadcast is still playing. The volume is lowered, but it's clear that the anchors are still discussing the issue about the heroes. Anxiety coils in Izuku's gut. "They'll settle things." Shigaraki makes a disgruntled sound. "TCH. You have an annoying amount of faith in them, cheat code. It's disgusting." Izuku frowns. "Why?" "Because," Shigaraki says, exasperated, as if it should be obvious, "you're just as brainwashed as the rest of these morons. You put trash like All Might up on pedestals, worship them like gods, make them the rulers of this shitty society while you praise their violence and pretend not to notice their failures." He clicks his tongue. "I almost pity you." That takes Izuku by surprise. "Why?" he asks again. Shigaraki analyzes him, leaning his cheek on his palm. "Sensei said your quirk was very self-sacrificial. Relies on you giving your own organic energy." Eyeing him warily, Izuku nods. "You spend all your time healing heroes, draining yourself for them, exhausting yourself for them every single day, and yet time and time again they've failed to protect you." A flash of defensiveness. Toga makes a little sound. Dabi steps on her foot. "Doesn't that make you a little pissed off?" Izuku doesn't respond. Shigaraki watches him carefully. "I almost pity you because the heroes have brainwashed you so badly, it's pathetic." Unease bubbles underneath the surface of his skin, thrumming within the pulsing of his veins. He doesn't like where this is going. What are you saying? Izuku rasps. Scarlet eyes peer down at him through lifeless fingers. Don't you ever think they're just using you for your quirk? Izuku stares at him. Think about it. If they didn't have you precious healers, then they wouldn't be able to cause nearly as much trouble as they do. Wouldn't be able to train their mini-heroes the way they do. They just keep you around because you give them the license to maintain peace through violence, but they don't really care about you. They just want you for your quirk. Izuku's breath catches in his throat. An old memory flashes in his mind, a conversation between him and his mother. It was when she told him about the dangers his quirk would put him in, how both heroes and villains would seek him out. All he could remember thinking was how weird it was to be considered desirable to people he didn't even know just for his quirk. Another memory follows, a more recent one, back when he was in a hospital. Detective Tsukaki, Principal Netsu, Recovery Girl, All Might and his mother were discussing the security measures that would be put in place following Shigaraki's attack, and all he could think was that they were only protecting him because of his quirk. But no. This is something he has already worried about for a long time. Back when Recovery Girl and All Might first approached him with their offer to get him into to help train him, he thought that this was all just because of his quirk, but then All Might told him, the very core of being a healer, no, of being a hero, is having the will to sacrifice oneself for another. Young Midoriya, you would be a great healer even if you were quirkless. Izuku knows his heroes love him. He will not sway. You're wrong, Izuku croaks. Besides, you're doing the same thing. Well yeah, but we're villains, Toga replies casually, chin propped up in her palms as she leans against the counter. We're not the ones worshipped for being perfect, Dabi says. And don't change the subject. Shigaraki leans closer. You know, cheat code, in a society bound by rules, it's not hard to find others being oppressed. So tell me this, have you ever actually had a choice in anything? Taken aback, Izuku bristles slightly and Shigaraki's voice continues drawling with a sly lilt, because I bet as soon as your quirk manifested everyone was telling you what you had to become. Did you ever want to do anything else other than be a healer? Did you ever even think to consider anything else, or did you just follow what society expected out of you? To live your life serving heroes? To exhaust yourself to make them stronger? For a beat, Izuku forgets his plan and glares heatedly at the two blood-red eyes peering at him from between cold, deceased fingers. It's a pathetic attempt to influence him. He knows what he's trying to do. It's almost like what Kota was trying to do back at the mountain, only more forced. He's trying to find a kindred spirit in Izuku. He's trying to stoke a hatred for heroes within him by claiming that he's like them, that he's oppressed. Like All for One, Shigaraki's words have a hint of truth behind them. But he's not as good at twisting them to his advantage. Izuku can see through it clearly. Back at the mall, when he had been ranting about All Might, Shigaraki had said, it's because that trash is smiling thoughtlessly, as if there was no one he couldn't save. Izuku assumed there might have been some misplaced hatred there for some event in which All Might had been unable to save him. But now that oppression seems to be the motive. Well, they're looking in the wrong place for sympathy. Izuku is not oppressed. Of course he had a choice. He's always had a choice. Right? He gives himself a mental shake. Of course he does. He loves being a healer. However, now does seem to be a good opportunity to allow the villains to think they've sown doubt into their timid healer. He stares at Shigaraki for a few moments before averting his gaze downwards, turning his head slightly. In the corner of his eye, he sees Shigaraki shift and lean away, seemingly pleased. Oh, come on Shigaraki-kun, you're making me feel bad watching this, Twice says, wringing his hands. He's just a kid. Reality is harsh. Welcome to the real world. He has a point, though, Spinner says. Who? Compress asks. Spinner scratches his neck. Both? He sighs and looks at Izuku. Shigaraki-kun's right about the heroes using you, although he could have put it a bit more gently. He gives Shigaraki a look at this. The blue-haired man rolls his eyes. Hey, it's a harsh reality for a kid to digest, and it's not one you can just force down their throat. Whatever. Shigaraki turns away with a huff. You try, then. I will, Spinner replies stubbornly before turning to Izuku. Before he can speak, the freckled boy asks weakly, why are you even bothering with this? Spinner blinks. You have me. Isn't that enough? I mean, I'm a student. You can't possibly expect me to ever follow your ideals. Spinner shares a glance with Compress. We just want to open your eyes, kid, the reptilian man says, let you see the world for how it really is. Compress takes a step towards him. Would you like to know what your friend said when I took you? He doesn't wait for a response. He said give him back. I thought it a rather strange thing to say. Give him back, as if you were something that belonged to them in the first place, as if you were simply a possession I stole from them. You were just a tool to them, Shigaraki drawls, gesturing lazily with his hand. You were just a bag of HP that the heroes failed to protect. Most of the villains glance at him in confusion, except for Toga and Dabi, the latter of whom closes his eyes and sighs like he wishes he didn't understand what he meant. They want him to believe that the heroes don't value him as a person. They want him to believe that he's just being used as a tool, a possession. And okay, that hits a little close to home. Izuku has walked a fine line with that his entire life. I've seen how his quirk works. Trust me, he'll definitely be worth a pretty penny. I'm going to become the best damn hero this world has ever seen, and you're going to become the best damn healer. And you are going to be mine. It hits close to home, but it makes the role all the more easy to play. He shrinks in on himself and ducks his head, letting his long curls fall in his face. It's not hard to look uncertain and afraid, because he's felt that way before. It's not hard to look small, because he's felt small all his life. But as he cowers before the villains, all he can remind himself of is, I am so much bigger than you know. The villains are silent around him for a few moments. Then he hears Shigaraki grunt and snap, what? Izuku glances up through his curls in time to see Dabi silently glare at the man. He isn't sure what happened, but he thinks Shigaraki just got elbowed. Before anything else can happen, Spinner squats down in front of Izuku's chair so that they're at eye level. Listen, kid, he says, I know it's probably hard growing up thinking one thing only to one day be told another. I'm sure it seems like the heroes gave you a good life. But it also seems like they've kinda been screwing you over. It sucks. And it might take some time to accept it, but soon you'll come to realize just how corrupt the whole hero society really is. For me, it was Stain who really tied it together. Shigaraki makes a noise but Dabi elbows him again. Spinner continues, his conviction to take back what it means to be a hero and purge the fakes that poison the society that we live in currently is why I'm here. We want to show everyone how toxic the heroes have become. Izuku tilts his head and gazes at him imploringly. Toxic? Spinner nods. Yeah. People become heroes for all the wrong reasons nowadays. Fame, money, glory, it makes them selfish. They take advantage of people like us, people like you. Man, this guy is practically Stain's second coming. Izuku can't believe Shigaraki let him join the League of Villains, considering how much he hates Stain. Actually, Shigaraki is starting to look a little annoyed in the corner over there. He supposes he shouldn't be surprised people were drawn to the League after Stain's downfall. His ideology was popular amongst the public, for a reason even Izuku could understand it. Unwittingly, his mind is drawn to Endeavor. He is trying to fulfill his own desire by raising me to be a hero to surpass All Might. Izuku presses his lips together. Alright. He can throw the villains a bone. Hunching up his shoulders, he hesitantly rasps, oh okay, maybe Stain had a point. Not all heroes are perfect, but they're human. Maybe some shouldn't be heroes, but to solve the problem by killing them. He lets the sentence hang. Spinner gives him a pitying look. Surprisingly, though, Dabi is the one to speak up. "It ain't pretty," he says in a low tone, "but it's the only way to truly solve the problem." Izuku glances at him and thinks that this is probably the first time he's seen him without a smirk on his face. Something has subtly shifted in the air. The villains aren't gazing at him the way they were before, like hungry wolves keeping an eye on their prey. They're more curious, observing. Beside Dabi, Shigaraki shifts in his seat, pushing himself so that he straightens up, but he doesn't take his eyes off of Izuku. The boy finds himself drawn in by his hawkish gaze. "We are going to kill All Might," he says in a voice so calm it doesn't even sound like it belongs to him. "We're going to kill him because he created this hero-centric society that turns people's lives into money or glory. The society that sticks tight to those rules, the citizens who blame the losers rather than encourage them. Nobody, no hero or civilian, cares about anything beyond their own selfish desires. They elevate those who are born with perfect quirks and are good at conforming to society's standards, while the rest of us, the ones that are different, the ones that have the audacity to think differently, are ostracized and labeled as villains. The League of Villains are fighting for a more just society and we intend to win this battle. See, that sounds all fine and dandy on the outside," Izuku thinks to himself, "but you kill people. Nothing will ever justify that." The way he talks about All Might like he did this on purpose makes Izuku's blood boil. Shigaraki's just looking for someone to blame for his life being so pathetic. God, Izuku misses All Might so much. He wishes he was with the man right now. Curling in on himself, he ducks his head and stares at his lap. A memory comes to mind. He isn't sure why this one, but he thinks of the time he was pulling All Might's hair up into a ponytail in the infirmary after school. They weren't talking much, but they didn't need to. They just enjoyed each other's company in a comfortable silence as the rosy afternoon sun slowly crept towards the horizon. The sheer peacefulness of it makes it one of Izuku's favorite memories. Izuku knows All Might loves him. He will not sway. "All Might does care about me," he whispers quietly, vision blurring. "He's not just using me for my quirk." The tears that fall from his eyes were brought on by longing, but the villains interpret them as denial. Spinner glances over his shoulder and shifts so that he's no longer squatting in front of Izuku. The boy takes a quick peek from under his bangs to see Shigaraki practically at the edge of his seat, red eyes locked on Izuku, looking by all means like a predator ready to pounce. "Yes, he is," he says, watching Izuku with rapt attention. "You know that deep down. I can tell. Maybe all this time you've just been trying to tell yourself otherwise, but you said it yourself, heroes aren't perfect. They're human, and they're selfish. All Might is no exception." Izuku starts crying. It seems like a good time to do so. He's no master of manipulation, but right now the villains are probably thinking they're winning him over or something. Also, he's really starting to get a bit annoyed with this conversation. Seeing someone cry usually makes people uncomfortable, so hopefully it'll make this conversation end soon. As he expected, the villains stand around in awkward silence as he sniffles and hiccups for the next couple of minutes. "Oh, kid." Spinner rubs the back of his neck. Shigaraki, at least, seems pleased. "Dabi, release his restraints," he says as Izuku's tears gradually subside. Dabi glances at him skeptically. "Are you sure? It's fine." Shigaraki spreads his arms. "We need to treat him like an equal. He's going to be our healer, after all. Besides," he tilts his head at Izuku, eyeing him up and down. "It's not like he can cause much trouble." Dabi looks like he's about to make a particularly sarcastic comment, then just shrugs and turns towards Izuku. His deft fingers are surprisingly gentle as he undoes the straps around Izuku's wrists. The greenet rubs the tender skin there gingerly as soon as his hands are free, and once Dabi undoes the restraints around his ankles, he tries to stand up. Almost immediately, his legs start wobbling dangerously and Dabi hastily steadies him. "Whoa, you all right there, kid?" Spinner asks, wide-eyed and ready to step in. Izuku nods jerkily. It probably takes a bit more than a nap for him to, recharge, Mag supplies helpfully. Shigaraki waves a hand at Kurogiri. Well, get him some breakfast, then. As Kurogiri moves to do just that, Spinner and Dabi help an unsteady Izuku limp over to the bar. They were also the ones that strapped him to the chair just last night. Izuku does not miss the irony in that. Nor does he miss the way Shigaraki's eyes bore into him the entire time. He whispers a quiet thank you as Kurogiri places a bowl of cereal in front of him and begins eating, keeping his head ducked. He didn't realize it earlier, but he's starving. Overusing his quirk always leaves him extra hungry. He wonders if he should tell them that he'd recover faster if they'd feed him more. Probably not. No, definitely not. He can handle being hungry and weak if it means he has more time before he has to heal all for one again. Suddenly, he's aware of a presence at his side. Toga. He startles, nearly choking on his cereal as he whips his head towards her. He hardly knows this one well, he hardly knows any of them, but she makes him incredibly nervous and uncomfortable, especially after that weird stuff yesterday with his bleeding lip. But instead of saying something creepy, she just smiles. That's still a little creepy, but he finds himself hesitantly smiling back anyways. There's a certain tension in the air, not a hostile one, it's more of a silent understanding that passes between the villains. Izuku ducks his head and pretends not to notice the subtle glances they share as they watch him eat breakfast. They're all acknowledging the delicate situation that they could sway Izuku to their side and have him join them, willingly, but he's clearly hesitant. So they want to play nice. None of the other villains eat, so he assumes that they already did, which makes him wonder what time it is. Shigaraki had seemed annoyed that he slept so long. Figuring it wouldn't do any harm to ask, Izuku puts down his spoon and warily glances at Toga. Excuse me? What time is it? Toga's eyes practically light up. It's 11:30 a.m. She sounds way too excited to answer his question. Also, she did so without even glancing at a clock, so he wonders if she's even right, but no one corrects her, so he assumes that she is. He must look surprised, because her grin widens and she giggles. You slept for so long, sleepyhead. Sorry. He says lamely, mostly because he doesn't really know what else to say, before turning back to his cereal. It's halfway done now, the sugary hero-themed flakes floating in milk. Amusement suddenly strikes him, a flicker of warmth in his chest. It feels so strange and alien in such a stressful environment. Before he can think better of it, he murmurs, I can't believe I'm eating almighty flakes in the League of Villains' secret hideout. There's a beat. Then, what? Shigaraki is suddenly at his shoulder and Izuku nearly flinches out of his seat. But it doesn't even matter because the next moment Shigaraki is whirling around to glare at Spinner. Spinner, I told you to quit bringing this shit over. He snaps. Spinner shrugs, unconcerned. Hey, say what you will about All Might, he knows how to make a good cereal. I don't think he actually makes the cereal, Magen says. Shigaraki's eye twitches. Kurogiri, the warp villain, raises his hands defensively. I simply grabbed the first thing I saw in the cabinet. Meanwhile, Izuku awkwardly glances back down at his cereal, which is steadily becoming more and more soggy. So, can I eat it or? He trails off when Shigaraki turns to stare at him, eyes hard as nails. Izuku doesn't quite know what's going on here, but he smartly decides to glance away. A moment later, the bowl is snatched away from him, Shigaraki stomping around the counter and behind the bar. Izuku watches, along with the rest of the villains, as he rummages about the cabinets in the mini-fridges, opening things with a bit more force than necessary, muttering under his breath the entire time. Not 2 minutes later, Shigaraki returns to Izuku and places the bowl in front of him again. It's filled to the brim with new, noticeably unheroic and honestly kind of bland-looking cereal. Izuku slowly glances back at Shigaraki to find the villain staring down at him with beady red eyes. His gaze is intense, just on the edge of a glare, and it makes the hair on Izuku's skin raise. PSST. Izuku's eyes dart past Shigaraki to see twice, Toga, and Dabi. Twice looks like he's trying to silently mouth something to him, except he's wearing a mask, so Izuku can't see his mouth to understand what he's trying to say. Beside him, Toga is repeatedly bringing her hand up to her mouth and down like she's scooping something out of a bowl. Oh. Eat it. They're telling him to eat it. Dabi just looks very done. Glancing back at Shigaraki once more, Izuku averts his gaze and turns back to the cereal, very pointedly scooping some into his mouth and chewing loudly. Shigaraki finally huffs and walks back to his seat. In the corner of his eye, Izuku sees twice and Toga give him a thumbs up. Hunching his shoulders, Izuku looks back down at his cereal and frowns to himself in confusion. Villains are weird. The following hours that pass are surprisingly uneventful. Izuku remains seated on his bar stool, with Toga and Spinner lingering close by. The latter is friendly enough to him, which Izuku supposes makes sense, if he's such a loyal follower of Stains, who he recalls had a certain level of respect for healers and also did save him from the Namu. He never thought having that villain seal of approval might benefit him one day. Spinner doesn't ask very personal or prying questions, thankfully, and although Izuku replies politely, the conversation quickly fizzles out. The rest of the villains talk amongst themselves idly or continue to watch the news. Izuku, for the most part, is left alone, which he's immensely grateful for. It feels like a small relief, the weight of having the villains' constant attention on him lifted just for a moment. With that pressure gone, he now has room for another worry. Being kidnapped, being held hostage, is an active situation. It can change at any second. The heroes can come bursting in without a warning. Or he might not even get rescued today. The uncertainty of everything does wonders for his anxiety. He feels like he's constantly waiting for something to happen, only he doesn't know what. It's like back when he was stressing about his final exam that recovery girl wouldn't tell him what to study for, except a million times worse. So he does what he did then. He over-prepares. Analysis and information gathering is always something that he's been good at. It helps him organize the ideas in his mind, helps him figure things out in a more orderly thought process. He's always been rather proud of his intelligence. After all, not many 14-year-olds can read a college-grade anatomy book multiple times and not only make sense of it, but also put the information to active use in their training. Part of him wonders if perhaps it's a way of his mind trying to overcompensate for his lack of combative quirk, but his analytical skills serve him well now. Keeping his head low, he starts by casually glancing around the room. The bar is plain and simple, with 2 doors and a curtain that seemingly leads to another room. Considering the League's apparent lack of knowledge about him, and the fact that Izuku had to be warped to him by Kurogiri, Izuku assumes that All for One is residing in a separate location. The only other furniture in the bar aside from the stools is the chair Izuku was strapped to, which is heavily padded and full of restraints. Actually, come to think of it, that's kind of strange. They didn't even use half the straps and bindings on Izuku. Do they just have this chair for whoever they kidnap? Does that mean they kidnap people often? No, this looks like it was meant to contain someone strong, someone powerful, someone like Kaken. Izuku's eyes widen. The list. He's such an idiot. How could he forget? The villains were after both him and Kaken that night. But why? What did Kaken do to get on their radar? Is it because of him? Were they going to use Kaken to force Izuku to heal All for One? But no, he could already do that. Why kidnap him then? Or did they just want to kill him? No, wait, that chair, it was meant for Kaken, clearly. To restrain him. Which means they didn't want to kill him. At least not immediately. Then why? He needs to ask. Somehow, without making it look too suspicious. There's a fragile peace between him and the villains right now, but it lies on the fact that they think his faith in the heroes is being wavered. They sure as hell don't trust him yet, and if he starts asking the wrong questions, he could get himself right back into trouble. So, glancing at Spinner, who he also notices has a sloppily bandaged arm, probably injured by Mendelay's claws, he files that information away for later. He hesitantly asks, "So do you guys just keep a heavily strapped chair like that around all the time, or?" He winces awkwardly. Maybe he could have worded that better. Behind him, Shigaraki barks out a laugh, "Right. That." He snickers as Izuku glances over his shoulder at him. "Yeah, sorry, bet you thought that was kind of overkill for someone like you. That was actually meant for your friend Rikugu." Izuku blinks, mildly surprised that he blatantly admitted it. "We wanted to bring him here too," Shigaraki goes on, "but that plan kinda ended up falling through last minute." Izuku pauses, but Shigaraki doesn't seem particularly hostile at the moment or anything, so he cautiously presses, "Why did you want to bring him too?" "Same as you," Shigaraki replies, "recruitment." Izuku feels something inside his stomach flip at the declaration, and the villain's grin widens. "Don't look so surprised, cheat code. I'd have to be blind not to have noticed his violent streak. And that temper, well, let's just say he left quite an impression during the sports festival. And I'm fairly certain I'm not the only one who's noticed." Scorching anger ripples through him, boiling his blood until it burns the walls of his veins like acid. Izuku nearly loses it right there, just barely restraining himself from pouncing on Shigaraki. This bastard thought he could take Kaken and use him like some kind of attack dog just because he's got a bit of a short fuse? Izuku could almost laugh if he wasn't so infuriated. "He would never have joined you," he whispers, then swallows when his voice trembles with rage. Trying again, he rasps, "I know him. He admires All Might too much." Shigaraki shrugs carelessly. "He had a powerful quirk and a desire to fight. We would have persuaded him eventually. Trust me, we can be very convincing." Dabi sniffs. "It's a moot point anyway. We didn't get him." Are you still upset about that?" Toga hops off her bar stool and skips over to him, grabbing his face and squeezing his cheeks between her palms. "Cheer up, Gwump Pipets." Dabi stares at her, eyes flashing. "I'll burn you alive." Toga hastily jumps back but giggles, "Even if you did, Izuku would heal me." She turns and grins at him. "Right?" Izuku blinks. Dabi's hand catches on fire. "Wanna bet? Oi, the kid's not gonna be using his quirk on anyone until he's finished healing sensei," Shigaraki snaps, glaring at them. "If you're gonna try and kill each other, save it for later." "Actually," Kurogiri says, his smooth, calm voice washing over them, "I think now would be a good time to say that just because we now have a healer in our ranks that does not give us license to cause each other harm constantly." "I like that rule," Spinner agrees immediately. "Reasonable." Compressed nods. "Yup. No way." "Sure." Shigaraki glances at Dabi, who huffs a sigh and lowers his hand, flames disappearing. "Whatever." Izuku glances between the villains, baffled by how the situation escalated and de-escalated so quickly. Toga sticks her tongue out at Dabi before returning to her bar stool. Dabi slinks off elsewhere. TCH. Shigaraki turns back to Izuku as if he might expect him to say more on the matter of Kaken, but instead Izuku avoids his gaze, fixing his eyes on the countertop. He's already heard all he needs about Kaken, and he doesn't trust what he might do if they keep talking about him like that. With him, it's fine, they can go on and on about oppression all they like, but he's seen firsthand how Kaken has struggled with his anger issues throughout his life and how much he's grown, and he won't stand for these villains targeting him for a weakness that they know nothing about. Just thinking about Kaken makes his throat tighten. He knows his friend is probably blaming himself for what's happened. Todoroki too. Hopefully they're taking care of each other. Either way, he's glad Kaken's not here. He needs to refocus on the task at hand. The information he's gathering. What does he know? Anything new since yesterday? Their desire to recruit Kaken is useful. That means the League could potentially be open to forcibly recruiting hero students in the future. There's also the fact that All for One is probably in another location, although he isn't quite sure what good that does for him, seeing as Kurogiri can just warp him there. There's the League's lack of general knowledge about All for One that might be useful. Then there's the League's motive. He's a little more confused about that. At first, Shigaraki kind of just seemed like the type that wanted to destroy things for fun, but now he's suddenly taking a page out of Stain's book and criticizing society. It's puzzling. The Shigaraki he met at the mall is very different from the Shigaraki he's meeting now. This one talks about how the League of Villains is fighting against the injustice of the hero-centric society as if they're a bunch of underdogs or tragic martyrs. Of course, they still want to kill All Might, but from what he's gathered, the basis of their motive seems to be oppression, mixed with Stain's conviction. We're going to kill him because he created this hero-centric society that turns people's lives into money or glory. The society that sticks tight to those rules, the citizens who blame the losers rather than encourage them. Nobody, no hero or civilian, cares about anything beyond their own selfish desires. They elevate those who are born with perfect quirks and are good at conforming to society's standards, while the rest of us, the ones that are different, the ones that have the audacity to think differently, are ostracized and labeled as villains. The League of Villains are fighting for a more just society, and we intend to win this battle. Izuku frowns. He guesses he understands the part about people born with perfect quirks being elevated in society's eyes. Kaken was always praised for his powerful quirk by his peers throughout their childhood. Izuku was too. Wouldn't the villains consider him privileged then? Spinner was right when he said that the heroes gave him a good life. Izuku isn't naive enough to think that he isn't lucky. He knows others must have had it worse than him. Take Shinsu for example. His friend had confessed to him one day, gasping and sweating as they took a breather in the midst of a sparring lesson, his motivation for becoming a hero. That in the past, he had been shunned, his quirk had been deemed evil, but that he couldn't help wanting to be a hero. Is that what Shigaraki meant by different? Shinsu was sort of labeled as a villain, but he moved past that and strived to be more. He didn't decide to ruin his own life by killing people and then blame All Might for his problems. Bitter resentment rises within Izuku, an easy conclusion, but he pushes it away. Unsatisfaction pricks at his mind. He feels like he's missing something here. Perfect quirks. He thinks about Shigaraki's quirk. Decay, is what the police called it. The first thought is that it's unpleasant. The image of Aizawa's skin crumbling away flashes before his eyes. His throat burns. The second thought is that it must be awfully inconvenient. He's been noticing the way Shigaraki touches and holds things with only 4 fingers. It's practically a handicap in everyday life. Sure, he seems like an expert at it now, but it must have been difficult at first. Shigaraki's back is turned to him now, so Izuku feels alright sneaking glances at him as they all eat dinner. The man eats rather sloppily, shoving fries underneath his mask and wiping his fingers on his pants. Izuku's lip twitches, and he wonders if Shigaraki's ever disintegrated his pants by accident. Getting dressed must be difficult with only 4 fingers, especially as a kid. Man, Shigaraki's quirk manifestation must have been wild. Izuku's amused thoughts suddenly come screeching to a halt. He blinks. Shigaraki continues to eat, oblivious to his gaze, and he forces himself to tear his eyes away, looking down at his own food in front of him. He thinks back to the day his quirk manifested, to the bird in his palms, how happy he was to discover that he had the power to heal with a single touch. His stomach curls. He can't imagine a 4-year-old boy would be very happy to discover that their quirk destroyed everything they touched. Yo, Midoriya. Finger snap in front of his face. Startling, he snaps his head up to see Spinner gazing at him. You good? Nodding, Izuku turns away and bites into his food to save himself from responding. So Shigaraki doesn't have a perfect quirk, obviously. Maybe he was ostracized for that, like Shinsu. Then All for One fits into this somehow too. Izuku doesn't know how long he's been Shigaraki's sensei, so maybe he's the one responsible for Shigaraki's descent into villainy. Put a child with a deadly quirk and an evil villain together and you have a recipe for disaster. The other League members he doesn't really know well enough to understand their motives, but they seem to be driven by the same desire to dismantle the hero-centric society and the oppression it causes. Spinner, at least, he can say is a strong follower of Stain's ideologies. Dabi and Toga apparently are too, but they seem a little less religious about it. So there's that. He sort of sees their point, not that he would ever admit it out loud. Just the part about quirk discrimination. It hurt to learn the extreme extent Shinsu was driven to in order to prove that his quirk wasn't evil. The hero society isn't perfect, of course. People assume certain things about each other based on their quirks. Hell, Izuku's been a victim of that more times than he can count. And yeah, maybe the idolization of only certain types of heroes kind of encourages that. But that doesn't mean you go around killing people because of it. Part of him still can't believe that they even tried to sway him to their side. He's a healer. No matter what they say or how they justify it, when it comes down to it, he will never approve of killing. It goes against everything that he is. Do they honestly think that he'll ever be on their side? If so, then he's vastly overestimated their intelligence. Shigaraki's words come back to mind. Have you ever actually had a choice in anything? Because I bet as soon as your quirk manifested everyone was telling you what you had to become. Did you ever want to do anything else other than be a healer? Did you ever even think to consider anything else, or did you just follow what society expected out of you? To live your life serving heroes? To exhaust yourself to make them stronger? Izuku sniffs. It irritates him, Shigaraki talking like he knows him, shooting off question after question like he knows he's already won. Of course he had a choice. Well, he wanted to be a hero, but becoming a healer was the next best option once his quirk manifested. Besides, his quirk is perfect for it. Why would he choose anything else? Something about that doesn't sit right with him. He pauses, frowning down at his food. Did you ever even think to consider anything else, or did you just follow what society expected out of you? Oh, he never really thought of anything else, did he? He blinks, going back through his memories, through his life plan. First, he wanted to be a hero, when he was young, then after his quirk manifested, his goal was just to become a healer. He never gave anything else much thought. Any thought. Is that bad? He likes healing people. It makes them happy. But what if he kind of restricted himself? There are plenty of other people that have jobs unrelated to their quirks. Izuku gives himself a mental shake. It's different for him, though. Healing quirks are rare, especially ones as powerful as his. He has a duty to become a healer. It would be selfish not to. Still, it does make him wonder. Would he even be allowed to do anything else? If he became a carpenter or an artist or a scientist instead, and people found out he had this quirk? He could imagine the surprise, the judgment, the scorn for letting such a healing quirk go to waste. Have you ever actually had a choice in anything? Stop. He needs to stop. This is a dangerous line of thinking. He can't let Shigaraki get in his head. He can't afford to get distracted now. He'll just push this aside for later. Finishing his meal, he crumples up the wrapper and glances up. Blood-red eyes meet his. Shigaraki stares at him fixedly from across the counter, glints of scarlet peeking out from between deceased fingers. As soon as their eyes meet, the edge of his lip quirks up. Skin prickling, Izuku hastily averts his gaze. Izuku Midoriya is going to spend yet another night with the League of Villains. It's an unavoidable truth that draws closer and closer as the late hour ticks by. Unless the heroes plan on making a night rescue, which could happen, but still. I'm surprised the heroes haven't come for me. He murmurs, eyes downcast as he curls his palms around his elbows. He definitely doesn't miss the grin Shigaraki shoots at Dabi before he says to him, "What did I tell ya, cheat code?" Toga bounces up to him, smiling brightly. "Don't worry, we're gonna take good care of you." She promises as if that's not the most terrifying thing in the world. Glancing up at her through his lashes, he meekly stammers, You will?" He lifts his fingers to brush against the cut on his lip. Her yellow eyes flash with hunger. Hands darting out to grasp his tightly, she brings her face close to his and nods rapidly. Yes. Yes, we will. I promise. I'm sorry about that. You're just so cute when you bleed. She gushes feverishly, eyes locked on his lip. It's difficult, you see, it's part of my quirk. I can turn into people if I drink their blood. I love blood, I love it so much that sometimes all I can think about is making people bleed. But I won't make you bleed, I promise. Even though you look so cute when you do. She looks a little heartbroken, like she's making such a huge sacrifice for him. Izuku takes a moment to process what she said before wrinkling his nose. You drink people's blood? Yup. At his tone, her grin takes a bit of a sharper edge. He, you might think it's weird, but it's normal. It's my normal. That's why I want to change this world, to make it an easier place to live. No, that's not what I meant, actually, Izuku interrupts. It's just, do you know how many diseases you can get from drinking random people's blood? Toga blinks. HIV, syphilis, hepatitis B and C, Izuku counts off his fingers. He gives her a disapproving look. These are very serious diseases, Toga-san. You should really be more careful. Toga, for once, doesn't look like she quite knows what to say. She just blinks owlishly. Her befuddlement lasts for about 3 seconds before she gives herself a quick shake, as if rebooting, and grins brightly once more. Okie dokie. Thanks. She wraps her arms around his neck in a brief hug, then lets go and skips off into another room, presumably to sleep. The other villains mill about, each preparing for their own night of rest or, in the case of Kurogiri and Spinner, preparing to watch over Izuku. The healer sighs, glancing at the chair with a wince. Magna peers with a cot in her arms. Here you go, kid. She plops it down in the corner. Izuku blinks in surprise. Huh? An arm drops around his shoulders. I figured there's no need for you to sleep in that uncomfortable chair all night again, Shigaraki says, feigning nonchalance. Izuku blinks up at him, pressed against his side, and the villain glances down from the corner of his eye. With a start, he realizes that he's waiting for a response. Oh. He squeaks, thank you. A curling grin. You're welcome. Then, Shigaraki turns away. Izuku watches him walk back over to the bar table, confusion and discomfort twisting in his gut. That was weird. Why would he? As Shigaraki sits down and starts muttering to Kurogiri, Izuku's gaze trails over to Spinner. The reptilian man is sitting close by, bandages unraveled, picking at the gashes on his arm irritably. His teeth are gritted and his brow is furrowed, in concentration as he pokes and scratches at his wounds. Izuku's eye twitches. He's not even wearing gloves. It's like he's asking for an infection, with the way he's shoving his fingers in there. Izuku looks at Shigaraki. Then back at Spinner. Then back at Shigaraki. Then gets an idea. Turning away from his cot, he shuffles over to Spinner and stops a few feet away, not wanting to disturb him, but wanting to catch his attention. He fidgets in place, wringing his hands until the man notices him and glances up. Kid? What's up? Keeping his eyes fixed on the floor, Izuku rushes out quickly. You should rinse out the wound with warm water and stitch it up if you can, but if not, then just keep it wrapped. You can even spiral the gauze around your arm and just tie the knot at your elbow to make it easier, but please keep it wrapped and keep your fingers away from it or you'll get an infection. He falters, cheeks heating up. Okay, good night. Without waiting for Spinner's reaction, Izuku spins around and retreats back to his cot. diving underneath the sheets and determinedly facing away from everyone. Silence fills the bar. Izuku forces himself not to lie stiff as a board, even though he feels the villain's gazes on him, making his skin prickle like a million ants are crawling on him. After a few long, quiet moments, he hears a bar stool creak. Footsteps approach him. He holds his breath. "Sleep tight, cheat code," Shigaraki's voice purrs. The footsteps fade away. Izuku exhales slowly. Moves and counter-moves. Chapter 33. Katsuki's footsteps pound against the pavement, the steady sound a rhythmic beat in his ears. Wind whips at his clothes, but even though the sun is dipping below the horizon, the leftover summer heat from the afternoon prevents him from getting cold. His body moves without him having to think about it, his feet carrying him down the path he knows like the back of his hand. He hasn't gone on it in a long while, but he'd have to be dead to forget it. The muscle memory coming back to him as naturally as breathing. It's the path that he and Izuku used to run along all the time in junior high. Every turn, every crack and crevice in the ground is so familiar to him, and he's grateful for it. It means he can just run mindlessly, not think about anything. Ignore the dry tears that have been staining his cheeks for the past 24 hours. Ignore the stifling weight in his chest that threatens to crush his lungs and leave him gasping for air until he can't breathe again. Ignore all the feelings that he's come to know all too well: failure, guilt, fear that linger just at the edge of the delicate numbness the running has caused that he's desperately shielding himself with, like a swollen wave poised to crash down on him, or a panther ready to pounce and devour him whole. But they won't, because he's still running. And everything remains at bay, for now. Katsuki feels a bead of sweat rolling down the back of his neck. His clothes and hair, slick with perspiration, cling to his skin. His muscles are burning and his chest is heaving as he pants heavily, his lungs screaming for respite. How long has he been out for? 2 hours? 3? It's hard to tell. He hasn't really taken a break. The sun was definitely still up before he left, though. He eyes the stars beginning to peek out in the rapidly darkening sky before letting out a huff. The old hag is gonna throw a fit when he goes back. Since he was on the villains list during the attack, the police advised him to stay inside once they got back, but Katsuki quickly found himself far too restless cooped up in his own home to give a shit about that advice, hence why he's out here. He becomes aware of the fact that his phone has been vibrating in his pocket sporadically for the past couple of minutes. She must be losing her fucking mind. Damn it. He doesn't want to return home. If he does, he'll be the one losing his fucking mind. There's just nothing to do there, nothing to do but think about how badly he fucked up and think about Izuku and Izuku. He's everywhere at home. Katsuki had to escape. But he's tired himself out now. Actually, he's pretty exhausted. So maybe he'll be too tired to think. He can just go home, shower, and go straight to bed. It's getting dark anyway, and he always goes to sleep early. With the thought in mind, Katsuki finishes his last lap around the path before beginning to head towards his house. He doesn't slow his pace, insistent on pushing himself till the last minute, and reaches his doorstep in record time. As expected, his mother is pissed when he walks in. The old hag starts yelling at him as soon as he steps past the doorframe, but he just brushes past her and heads straight into the bathroom to take a shower, ignoring her infuriated screeching behind him. His legs shake from exhaustion ever so slightly as he stands in the shower, but he ignores that too and focuses on scrubbing himself clean. It's a menial task, one he does every day of course, but it keeps him busy, keeps his mind off of the deep, aching crack in his chest because maybe if he doesn't think about it, it won't hurt so much. Bullshit. He scrubs harder. Sweat and soap suds disappear down the drain, and then he's stepping out of the shower. He dries himself off, goes back to his room, gets dressed, then sits down his bed and his eyes land on Izuku's sweater. The crack in his chest grows bigger. Katsuki jumps to his feet as the wave suddenly swells, threatening to crash down on him. He needs to do something. He needs to do something right now, before it gets too hard to breathe. He needs to focus on something. His lungs are getting tight, his eyes are burning and blurring, and fuck no, he's crying. No, 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 he needs to stop. He needs to stop or he won't stop. What can he do? He needs a distraction. Fuck, Zuku exclamation mark. He needs to, maybe he should go on another run. Somebody knocks on the door. He startles, gasping for breath, but the knock didn't come from his bedroom door. It came from their front door. He can faintly hear his mother answer whoever knocked as he struggles to regain control of his suddenly ragged breathing, but to his surprise, she yells a moment later, "Oi, Katsuki, your friend is here." Bewildered, Katsuki rapidly blinks his wet eyes and glances over at his door. Shitty hair? What is he doing here? The growing tightness in his chest makes itself more apparent, and Katsuki shakes his head. Fuck it, whatever the reason, it's good that he's here. Shitty hair always manages to distract him, and the redhead knows him better than he would like to admit, so of course it makes sense that he would come visit him now. He probably thinks he needs to be cheered up or some shit, and normally Katsuki would scoff at the mere suggestion, but right now he'd be grateful for any sort of distraction that could save him from this wave that threatens to drown him. Turning, he stumbles over to his door and yanks it open. But it's not Shitty Hair standing beside his mother. It's Icy Hot. The other boy's gaze turns to meet his. Katsuki freezes, breath catching in his throat. What the fuck? Why is he here? Icy Hot's face is flat, devoid of emotion as usual, but his eyes narrow ever so slightly as they roam over Katsuki, his gaze intense, focused, purposeful. It makes him feel strangely exposed, like he's being analyzed, or assessed. Defensiveness immediately rises in his tight chest and he clenches his jaw. What the fuck does he want? He glares, still breathing heavily, through his nose, and doesn't greet Icy Hot. The other boy doesn't greet him either. Mitsuki glances between the two of them before her own withering glare settles on him. Well? She demands, fucking be polite, you ass. He's your guest. Katsuki doesn't react beyond an eye twitch, and somehow Icy Hot doesn't look at all surprised by Mitsuki's sudden loud tone. The two boys hold each other's gazes, for a long moment, then finally, Katsuki wordlessly steps aside. Taking the cue, Icy Hot silently walks past him into his room and Katsuki makes to follow, but not before giving his mother a look that clearly says don't interrupt us. She scowls but reluctantly turns away with a huff. Katsuki closes the door behind him and turns to see Icy Hot standing in the center of his room, looking around. The defensiveness flares up again, and he almost wants to dare him to comment on something, but he holds his tongue. He's even more hyper-aware than before of everything Zuku in his room, of things that might seem odd or out of character for him to possess, but Icy Hot's eyes don't linger on his stars or the sweater or anything for a particularly long time. Instead, he slowly turns to face him again as soon as the door closes, gaze, still roaming, still analyzing, still searching for something. Katsuki doesn't know what, and it's bothering the hell out of him. There's a long, awkward moment of silence in which neither of them speak. Then, finally, "How are you?" Icy Hot asks. Katsuki's eyes narrow at the question. Even though there's not much inflection in his voice, Icy Hot seems to ask it in such a cautious way. Katsuki finds his mind flashing back to another terrible night, to him gasping for air and picking up a phone call and hearing Icy Hot's voice asking in that tone, "Are you okay?" He grits his teeth as a flash of irritation lashes him. Is this going to happen every time he has a shitty night? How the fuck do you think I'm doing? He snaps. Icy Hot's eyes flicker to his tear-stained cheeks before sliding back up to meet his gaze. Katsuki's teeth grind and he bites out, "That's a shit question." "What, couldn't do it over the phone this time? Daddy stopped paying your phone bills?" Icy Hot doesn't rise to the bait. "I wanted to see you for myself," he replies in an even tone. "Fucking why?" Katsuki asks incredulously. "What could you possibly get out of seeing me?" Being seen is the last thing Katsuki Wants right now. Right now he's weak and pathetic and he's just trying so hard to stay breathing, but Icy Hot's face remains impassive and fuck, that drives Katsuki more crazy than anything. The other boy opens his mouth to reply, but Katsuki is already continuing. Wanted to see how much of a mess I am? Wanted to get a good kick out of seeing me like this? His voice starts to rise. Icy Hot's eyes widen slightly. Bakugo, well, fuck you then, here you go. He shouts, panting raggedly. The tight feeling in his chest is getting worse again and he clenches his jaw, trying to swallow down his frustration. Fuck it, he's not gonna deal with this bullshit. Baring his teeth, he glares at his hot and snarls, now you better hightail it the fuck out of here before I blow your ass up to bits. And, the fucker still has the audacity to look calm. Whatever minuscule hints of surprise smooth back effortlessly into the emotionless, unruffled mask that Icy Hot wears every day, and Katsuki's jaw twitches. Icy Hot opens his mouth to try again. Bakugo, you seem to be dealing with this awfully well, huh, asshole. Katsuki sneers, taking a step forward into the other boy's space. A little funny, considering you seemed so eager to get into Zuku's pants earlier, but I guess everything's easier to deal with when you're nothing but a stone-cold emotionless bitch. Katsuki suddenly finds his back hitting the wall and the next thing he knows, Icy Hot is right in his face. Don't you dare, he hisses, voice quivering with fury. For a brief moment, Katsuki's head spins from hitting the wall, and the only thing filling his vision is Icy Hot's heterochromatic eyes. But unlike usual, they're not cold, no, now they're burning like a scorching wildfire as they bore into Katsuki's own eyes. Don't you dare think that I'm not just as upset about this as you are. Midoriya is not just yours to be upset over. Regaining his composure, Katsuki scowls and tries to shove him away. What the fuck, the hell do you mean by that? But Icy Hot refuses to be pushed back and shoves him against the wall again. Exactly what I said. He shouts in his face, all previous calmness in his voice gone as he glares furiously at him. Midoriya is not just yours to be upset over. I know you have something special with him and I respect that, believe me, I do, but that boy has touched the lives of each and every one of his classmates, including myself, and you will not dismiss us so easily. We have just as much right to be upset about this as you are. Gritting his teeth, he makes a noise of frustration. Damn it, Bakugo, pull your head out of your ass and realize that you're not alone here. This is our failure. We're his protectors too, you know. That strikes a nerve deep in Katsuki's chest. Our failure? Our failure? He barks, don't fucking act like you've been there. Don't fucking act like you've been by his side all your life. You know who has? Me. So don't fucking act like you know what I'm going through. He's shouting by the end of it, throat tight with rage and frustration. Icy Hot inhales sharply as he opens his mouth to retort, looking by all means like he's about to shout back at him, but then he catches himself. Instead, he pulls back slightly and says in a low tone, I don't. Katsuki can't help the flicker of surprise he feels. Midoriya is not my childhood friend, Icy Hot says quietly, and I haven't known him all my life. Katsuki watches him suspiciously as the other boy meets his gaze solemnly. The fire has died down, only to be replaced by something else. Something Katsuki can't quite name. But he is the reason that I use my fire in battle, Icy Hot continues, barely above a whisper, and he is the reason that I can talk to my mother, and he is the reason that I have any hope of ever becoming a true hero. And I failed to protect him. And that hurts. His voice breaks at the last word and he grits his teeth, squeezing his eyes shut as he turns his face away. Katsuki stares at him, shocked by the raw emotion. Hurt, that's what he saw beneath the fire. Icy Hot is hurting just like him. Katsuki swallows heavily, heart pounding in his chest as he gazes at the other boy. There's not a trace of the emotionless facade anymore as Icy Hot lifts his head to look at him again. His jaw is clenched and his eyes are steely with determination as he fixes him with a firm look. but I swear on my life that I'm going to do everything that I can to save him. But I'm going to need your help. I'm not strong enough for him and neither are you, but together, damn it, together, we might just stand a chance at getting him back." Katsuki is still staring at him in shock, but his last words catch his attention. "Get him back?" Icy Hot nods slowly. "Yaozu put a tracker on the Namu back in the forest. That's what I came here to tell you. Me, her, and Kirishima, we're going to go get him." Katsuki's heart jolts. "What the fuck?" he exclaims, "why didn't you start with that, you asshole?" Icy Hot gives him a mildly disgruntled look, but Katsuki ignores that and pushes himself off the wall. "What the fuck are we waiting for then? Let's go get him." "No. Wait, no." Icy Hot grabs his arm as he brushes past him. "We can't leave tonight." "What?" Katsuki snaps, whirling on him. "Why the fuck not? Yaozu wants us to wait for the heroes to act first," Icy Hot explains, letting him go. Wherever the tracker leads, she doesn't want to go near it until the heroes do. Fury and disbelief at the utter audacity of this bitch burns in Katsuki's chest. "Are you fucking kidding me?" he hisses. "Zuku is out there kidnapped, we have a way to fucking get him back, and she wants us to wait? What's even the fucking point then if I don't like it either? But it was the only way to get her to agree, and we can't do this without her," Icy Hot interrupts, voice dropping back into an even tone that makes Katsuki's eye twitch. "This is incredibly illegal and dangerous, so she wants to try and do this safely as possible." Katsuki lets out a wordless, frustrated snarl, whipping around to begin pacing circles across his room. Icy Hot watches him seethe silently for a few moments, then adds, "We won't be fighting either." Katsuki very nearly explodes. "Are you fucking kidding me?" he screeches. "Bukagu, we can't," Icy Hot stresses. "We don't have our provisional licenses." "I don't give a fuck about licenses," Katsuki yells, stomping over to him. "Nothing is going to stop me from blowing up the fuckers that took Zuku." "Then I guess you won't come," Icy Hot says tightly. "Fuck you, I'm coming." Katsuki spits. "Not if you're going to ruin everything by being reckless." Icy Hot finally snaps, glaring at him. "We have one shot at getting Midoriya back, we can't mess this up." Frustration wells in Katsuki's chest and he lets out a stream of profanities, dragging a hand roughly through his hair. "Fuck. Fuck," he curses, even stomping his foot on the ground like a child. "Damn it, why even invite me then? You know I'm shit at sitting on my ass and playing by the rules." Icy Hot looks at him seriously. "I invited you because I know how important Midoriya is to you." Katsuki looks up at this. Icy Hot meets his gaze unwaveringly. "And," he adds, a bit softer, "I think, if we do get him back, you are going to be the first person he would want to see." There's a long silence after his words. Katsuki can't hear a hint of deception in his voice, he just sounds earnest. It makes something pull in his chest, something that feels dangerously close to gratitude, that Icy Hot would still think to invite him, still want him to come along even though he knew he might mess things up just because he knew it would be important to him. Katsuki sniffs and looks away, skin prickling under Icy Hot's gaze. "Whatever. It's not like they're fucking friends or anything." Clearing his throat, he huffs, "So now we wait." Icy Hot straightens up slightly. "Actually, Yaozu overheard All Might talking with the police, and apparently they're going to make their move tomorrow night. So be ready." "Tomorrow night? God, the League will have had Zuku for almost 3 whole days by then." But at this point Katsuki is just grateful to know that there is something to look forward to instead of just going insane waiting and doing nothing. He perks up. "You bet your ass I will be," he declares, determination filling his veins. Icy Hot nods, and Katsuki finds that the fiery determination in his eyes has reignited, burning hot enough to match his own. The cold fear in his chest that hasn't left since Zuko was kidnapped dies down slightly, not disappearing completely, but is pushed aside to make room for something else: confidence. I'll lend you my strength. Use it. Katsuki is a force to be reckoned with on his own, but so is Icy Hot. And damn it, if they could take down All Might together, then they sure as hell could do this together too. The next morning during breakfast, Spinner approaches him. "Oh, hey, Midoriya-kun." Izuku blinks and looks up. Spinner scratches the back of his neck with his good arm. "I tried what you said last night, but I'm not sure if I did it right. Mind taking a look?" He holds out his arm. Vaguely, Izuku is aware of all of the villains immediately pausing and looking over at them. The weight of their stares makes his heart skip a beat. Spinner gazes at him patiently, but he can't be oblivious. This must be some sort of test, Izuku realizes. Feigning innocence, the greenette nods meekly and turns towards him, reaching out to gently unwrap his poorly bandaged arm. He can't help wrinkling his nose just a bit when he sees the wound underneath. Mandalay's claws left messy gashes in Spinner's scales, although at least they don't seem to be too deep. It looks like he might have started to stitch it up himself but gave up quickly. It's really just a mess. Shigaraki's eyes burn holes into the back of his head. Izuku swallows. "Do you have a first aid kit?" he asks Kurogiri weakly. "Play the role. There wouldn't be any harm in fixing up Spinner through traditional means. It would make the villains nicer to him, and maybe increase his chances of finding out new information. Right? That's why he decided to do this in the first place." He steadfastly ignores the traitorous voice in the back of his head that tells him he'd be too scared to refuse to heal him anyway. Behind him, he can practically hear Shigaraki grin. "You heard him, Kurogiri. Get the kid a first aid kit." "Of course." Kurogiri reaches under the counter and pulls out a kit that he slides across the table towards Izuku. It's not very well stocked, there's not even disposable gloves, but there's a stitching needle and enough clean gauze for him to make do with. Well, the gloves he's a bit miffed about for sanitary reasons, but at least he doesn't have to worry about his quirk automatically activating thanks to his injuries. He takes Spinner to the bathroom, first washing his own hands, then carefully washing the man's gashes because he doubts he did it correctly last night. Once they're clean, they sit down at the bar and Izuku starts with the stitches. He works with a kind of disconnected efficiency, going through the motions of piercing the scales and dragging the thread through with an intense focus that somehow simultaneously leaves room for no thought. It helps him ignore the way the villains are watching him like wolves circling their prey. He tries to take it as a learning experience too. He hasn't done stitches many times, and he's never done it on someone with scales before. It's not too different, but as his fingers brush against Spinner's rough scales, he starts to notice something odd. Every time his skin makes contact, he feels something warm flowing beneath it. It takes him a moment to realize that it's Spinner's energy he's feeling. Right. Even though he's injured, that part of his quirk still works, the part that can sense other people's natural energy, their injuries. He wonders why he never figured this out before. He knew, of course, that he could do it once he stopped his quirk, but he didn't know it still worked if he was injured. Then again, as a healer, he supposes he doesn't often get injured in the first place. But now that he doesn't have to focus so hard on stopping his quirk, he can explore feeling Spinner's energy a bit more easily. Since his fingers are sliding so close to his wounds, he can feel the other's life force thrumming vibrantly beneath his fingertips as he attempts to repair himself. Izuku's own energy lies dormant inside of him. It's so strange to have it not react automatically in response to a wound like this, to not feel it reach out and try to flow out his fingertips. I assume that's probably your body's natural attempt at self-preservation, to use your energy to heal yourself before you heal others. It makes sense, he supposes. Still, it feels strange. Not warm and buzzing like it is in Spinner. It's more thick and sluggish, like a sleepy dragon curling protectively over a clutch of eggs within him. Unlike before, his energy almost seems tangible now, for some reason. Like he could grab it, if he wanted to. Done. He finishes wrapping up Spinner's arm and leans back. Spinner admires the neatly wrapped gauze and grins at him. "Thanks, Midoriya-kun." Izuku plasters on a smile and nods. In the afternoon, his time runs out. "Alright, cheat code," Shigaraki says, sauntering up to him. "Seems like you've regained your strength. Time to pay another visit to Sensei." Izuku's stomach drops, and he nearly throws up the lunch he just ate. "No." He immediately croaks, nearly knocking over his bar stool in his haste to scramble to his feet. Shigaraki stills and Izuku's heart leaps to his throat, stammering, I mean no. The other villains are looking over now and his mind whirls, frantically trying to think of a way out of this. He can't heal all for one again. This is happening too quickly. He was supposed to have more time. The heroes were supposed to be here by now. This wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't supposed to have come to this. What is he going to do? Midoriya-kun, Kurogiri rumbles. Izuku startles and glances up. Golden eyes bore into his. Shigaraki-kun's sensei is benevolent, he assures, gentle and calm. If you come quietly, he will not treat you harshly. Izuku swallows heavily. A deep, faint shudder starts from the roots of his very soul, spreading throughout his entire body. Is he just going to be drained over and over until All for One is healed? Then tossed aside for the League to use once All for One is through with him? Is that his future? Don't worry, I can wait. I'll be more than content to watch you grow into a fine young healer. I bet you'll be just like Recovery Girl with a quirk as flexible as yours. You'll be traveling all across Japan during your career, healing heroes left and right. Isn't it exciting? I'll heal your brother as soon as I can. I promise. I won't let Stain take your hero away from you. Once I pass my quirk on to young Dagata, I would like you to be by his side. Izuku clenches his jaw. No, he already has a future, a better one that he's still reaching for, and he will not let the villains take it from him. That still doesn't stop him from trembling with fear as he nods and quietly agrees, keeping his eyes downcast as Shigaraki steps to his side, guiding him with a hand on his back through the warp gate that Kurogiri opens. A cold wave washes over him as he re-emerges into the room he was in the day before yesterday. It looks much the same, dark with only the glow of a TV for light, except perhaps there's a couple less pieces of medical equipment than last time. All for One sits in the same chair. Ah, Midoriya-kun, he greets pleasantly, come in. Izuku doesn't move. Shigaraki's hand firmly pushes him forward. Terror mounts with every step he takes, All for One waiting patiently with that constant shadow of a smirk playing on his lips. When he finally stands in front of the villain, All for One speaks again. I heard from Tamura-kun that you are adjusting well. His tone is conversational, and he gestures with his hand, but Izuku's eyes immediately lock on his fingers. Sharp, jagged blades, piercing his chest, forcing his quirk, tearing his energy away from him. Something snaps so hard within Izuku that he flinches. He stares at those fingers heatedly. He will not let that happen to him again. Resolve unlike any other solidifies in his chest. He doesn't know what, but he needs to do something. All for One was clearly expecting the response, and when he doesn't get one, he sighs. I know this may seem difficult and frightening in the beginning, but I'm hoping you can sympathize with our cause, he says. I have witnessed so much suffering at the hands of heroes. I only wish now that my comrades may now have the privilege to feel the relief of a healer's touch. He trails off, letting the words sink in. Izuku stays quiet, still staring at his hand. Another length pause. All for One, at least, then seems to realize that Izuku is not in the mood for casual conversation. He straightens up ever so slightly. Well, then. The air shifts. Before we begin, I would like to ask you a question first. A few, perhaps, depending on your answer of the first. And if you lie to me, I will know. Izuku stiffens. The way he said that another quirk? A truth quirk of some kind? All for One doesn't give him long to wonder about it. Has All Might passed down one for all? Izuku's eyes widen in horror. Mirio. A strange feeling washes over him, loosening his tongue, compelling him to speak, to confess. Whatever this quirk is, its effects must go beyond lie detecting. It feels more like truth pulling. Just the thought of resisting makes his chest start to tighten until it feels like he can't breathe. No. Then as soon as it started, it's over. The truth is out, and Izuku lets out a sigh of relief. All Might was going to wait until summer break in order to give Mirio one for all in case something bad happened. He doesn't know when exactly during summer break, but he knows All Might would have definitely informed him as soon as it happened. God, he's so glad he didn't have to lie to All for One. The villain grins. No? All this time, and that fool never thought to find a successor? He clicks his tongue and hums, chuckling to himself. Well, never mind then. Let's get on with the healing session, shall we? He raises his hand and a jolt of unbridled terror spikes through Izuku's body, stopping his heart for a split second. Wait. He yelps, grimacing when his throat protests painfully. All for One pauses. Yes. Quivering, uncontrollably, Izuku stammers, I'll heal you willingly, just don't use that quirk on me please. His voice cracks pathetically. He shrinks in on himself, squeezing his eyes shut. All for One doesn't need him to be willing. He's just embarrassing himself by begging. He's just making a fool of himself. He's just proving what a weak, pathetico. But how would you heal me if you're injured? Izuku's head snaps up, eyes wide in surprise. All for One watches him sightlessly, but Izuku sees no obvious sign of deception. Shigaraki-kun sensei is benevolent. If you come quietly, he will not treat you harshly. An overwhelming sense of relief, no, of gratitude washes over him, gratitude that his captor is so kind enough to be open to accepting what he could so easily take by force. The emotion chokes him, makes him go weak in the knees, so much so that he nearly drops to the ground and starts weeping. He flinches, snapping out of his shock, forcing himself to regain control of his scattered dangerous emotions. All for One is still waiting for an answer, his presence pressing down on Izuku, making it nearly impossible for him to frantically search for a reply in his mind. Shit, why did he say that? Why did he say that? He can't do anything. Think, damn it. What can he do? What has he learned? What can he use? He suddenly recalls the way his own energy felt in contrast to Spinner's when he was stitching him up this morning, the way it lay dormant inside of him, thick and nearly tangible, almost like he could. I'll push it. All for One tilts his head. I'll push my energy into you. Normally I just let it flow, stopping it is usually the hard part, but the idea forms the same time it pours out of his lips. You said my quirk stops when I'm injured because my body focuses on healing itself before others, but I think it just stops it from flowing automatically, not it won't stop me from forcing it out if I wanted to. And it'll be better to heal you in shorter bursts, I mean. If you take a lot of energy out of me then I'll need more time to rest and it'll take longer for you to heal. And Midoriya-kun. All for One silences him with a single word. Izuku's jaw snaps shut. To his relief, the villain's tone is pleased. That is a wonderful idea. Far more appealing for the both of us. His hand lowers back down to rest on the arm of his chair. The knot in Izuku's chest loosens ever so slightly. You have superiority when it comes to matters of healing. I will trust your judgment here. Come. Stomach contracting into a tight ball, Izuku reluctantly steps closer, gaze roaming over the disfigured man in front of him. He's even more horrifying up close, and Izuku's hands tremble as he raises them. For a moment, he doesn't know where to place them. All for One is wearing a three-piece suit that covers pretty much everything except his hands and face, the former of which Izuku is still too terrified to touch. But his face, his scarred, eyeless mess of a face. Swallowing, Izuku squeezes his eyes shut and gently places his hands on All for One's head. The villain doesn't move. Immediately, Izuku can once again sense his energy swirling around his weak spots. Right hip, left hand, left knee, and face, of course. Which one should he heal? He should try to leave him with the bigger, more crippling injuries, right? That way, when All Might does come. Wait a minute, what is he even talking about? Izuku doesn't even know how to direct his energy yet. He doesn't even know if he can force his energy out. He was just spouting bullshit back there in a desperate attempt to save his own ass. He doesn't know if this is going to work. Focus, focus. What can he do? His hands are on All for One's face. That means, if he does manage to push his energy out, it'll probably go to his eyes first. Probably. Hopefully. He can feel empty spaces in his energy where the organs are missing. All for One won't be blind anymore. That's not great, but he'll still be pretty physically disabled by his other injuries. And they're small enough organs to regrow that they won't completely exhaust Izuku, but they'll take enough energy out of him to excuse him from healing any of All for One's other injuries. Yeah, this'll work. So now he just has to figure out how to force his quirk. Izuku turns his attention inward, to the energy he's now more aware than ever before. It hums ever so faintly within him, thick and curling as it spreads throughout his veins. He pushes at it, he thinks. Nothing happens at first. He pushes again, imagining the hose, and his fingertips start to tingle in a familiar way. He pushes again, harder, and it feels almost tangible, like he's poking and prodding at some invisible sleeping tiger, ignoring the way it growls at him in warning. A pressure starts to build in his chest, but he keeps pushing, shoving, trying to grasp at whatever this feeling is. He's distantly aware that he starts to shake, like his whole body is telling him this is wrong, telling him don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. He grabs his energy, gives one final shove, and it's as if a dam breaks. The closest thing he can compare it to is like a pimple being popped. A sudden burst, then slow oozing. The first part startles him and he scrambles to get a control over his energy, but a second later it's slowing down to a near stop. It startles him even more to realize that he does seem to have some tangible feel over his energy now. It's thick and dense like sludge and moves at a snail's pace. He pushes with all his might, and it does help move it along, but his body shudders with the sheer amount of effort it takes him. This is so different from what he's used to and feels so utterly wrong, like he's betraying his body somehow or going against his quirk's wishes. He can't even tell if it's working or not, he can't tell how he does it but he keeps it up until the empty pocket of energy beneath his fingers doesn't feel so empty anymore, then yanks his hands away. He nearly collapses, legs wobbling dangerously, but he catches himself on All for One's armchair, clutching the edge with white knuckles. For a few moments, he simply gasps for breath, eyes still closed, trying to recover from the ordeal, trying to figure out what the fuck just happened and how the hell did he do that? A large hand comes to cup his cheek. Opening his eyes, he wearily glances up, only to immediately look away, feeling as if he just got burned. His stomach locks up tight, regret filling every inch of his being. A hard knot constricts his throat, making it nearly impossible to breathe as All for One tilts his chin, forcing him to meet his gaze. Two searing, predatory eyes penetrate him with an intense stare, rich, scarlet pools of blood filling his irises. Izuku trembles, all thoughts escaping his mind as a primal, unadulterated fear takes over his body. He's never felt so close to death before. No, he's literally staring death straight in the face. The hand on his face feels like a brand, burning him, trapping him, holding him in place. All he can do is quiver while All for One's thumb gently rubs his cheek, taking his time as his eyes tear past every defense Izuku has ever put up, burying into his very soul, exposing him, forcing a level of such raw vulnerability that it makes him feel like his skin is being peeled off, but he doesn't dare move. Finally, after what feels like ages, All for One speaks. "You have lovely eyes, Midoriya-kun." Izuku thinks he might throw up. All for One continues to stroke his cheek, leaving behind a burning trail wherever he touches, and rumbles, Thank you for giving me back mine. It's been so long since I've been able to see another face. Sensei. Shigaraki's voice is a whisper behind Izuku. All for One's eyes slide past him. Damura-kun. The hand finally leaves Izuku's cheek. Now with All for One's attention off of him, the healer feels like a massive weight has been lifted off of his chest. He pushes himself away from the villain's chair, practically stumbling backwards in his haste to get away, but he's a lot weaker than he thought he'd be from the healing session. Before he can take more than a couple of steps, Shigaraki's hand shoots out and snags his arm, keeping him from going any further. The man isn't even looking at him though, he's simply staring at All for One, face slightly slack. Izuku realizes with a small jolt that he's not wearing his mask. All for One gazes at him for a moment, then smiles. It's different than the other ones Izuku has seen from him, less condescending and more pleased. Like he's actually happy. It's strange. Tamura-kun, he repeats, voice as gentle as a cooing dove, you've grown. He reaches up to cup Shigaraki's face. Izuku hears a sharp inhale. Shigaraki's eyelids flutter for the barest of seconds, then he slowly tilts his head and nuzzles into the palm slightly. All for One's fingers gently scratch the back of his head, his thumb brushing over his left eye. You look different, he murmurs. Shigaraki hums. Cheat code healed them. Back at the mall. Did I forget to mention it to you? You did. All for One's eyes linger on Shigaraki's face before sliding back over to Izuku. He freezes, but all for One says is, you continue to impress me, Midoriya Izuku. Once more, I thank you. And I look forward to our next meeting. He lowers his hand, nodding behind them. Go on and rest now. I'll see you again soon. Izuku just barely stifles a sigh of relief. Shigaraki bows his head, and, after a moment, Izuku does too, since All for One can see it now. He can feel the man's gaze burning the back of his head as he walks away with Shigaraki, the other villain's hand still on his arm. He's unsure whether it's to trap him or simply to steady him since he's rather weak on his feet. Kurogiri is waiting for them at the end of the room, watching them with golden eyes that glow in the dark. As they approach, Izuku notices that Shigaraki is watching him too, rather blatantly staring at his face even when Izuku glances back at him. His gaze holds only a mere shred of the intensity of All for One's, but the vibrant, blood-red color is sickeningly similar. For a moment, Shigaraki simply stares at him. But then, his lips slowly, ever so slowly, peel back into a nightmare of a grin, and a devilish gleam flickers across his eyes. Izuku trembles. The four-fingered grip on his arm flexes. Kurogiri. Shigaraki takes his mask out of his pocket and puts it on. Take us home. As Izuku steps through the portal, returning once again to the League of Villains, he has to forcibly swallow down a wail of distress that threatens to rise in his chest. How the hell is he going to get out of here? Chapter 34 holds a press conference in the evening. Izuku sits hunched over at the bar table, half-heartedly picking at his dinner. Every time he tries to bring food into his mouth, All for One's eyes flash in his mind and nausea churns his stomach. He lowers his fork miserably. What's the point, anyways? All this food is going to do is turn into energy that he's going to be forced to give to All for One. Why eat at all? But the villains are watching him, so he reluctantly bites into his food and forces himself to chew, trying to ignore the way it tastes like ash in his mouth. Beside him, Shigaraki lounges against the counter, looking nothing so much as a satisfied panther that has caught its prey. Once they returned to the bar after the last healing session, he and Kurogiri became significantly more friendly towards Izuku. Whereas before Shigaraki would leave him alone for the most part, now he's hardly left the boy's side. This behavior does not go unnoticed by the other villains who, in turn, also have started acting more openly friendly towards him. If anything, it makes him feel even worse. The sensation of being so utterly trapped bears down on him like an inescapable pressure, and the panic that he's been doing such a good job at keeping at bay for the past 2 days starts to bubble in his chest. He almost starts crying when he sees Aizawa on the TV. The man is nearly unrecognizable, hair combed and clean shaven in clothes that actually fit him well. He's standing in front of dozens of flashing cameras and microphones that Izuku knows he hates, apologizing on behalf of to a hostile and unforgiving audience. Reporters throw loaded questions and harsh criticism from all sides, and unsurprisingly Principal Nezu ends up doing most of the talking, keeping a calm, level head as he gives pacifying, concise answers that don't provide much detail. Despite his responses being polite and logical, Izuku can easily tell that they're unsatisfactory. Toga's high-pitched giggle catches his attention during a brief commercial break. She's lying on his cot, grinning as she holds her phone mere inches away from her face. Uh-oh. She sing-songs, people are pissed. Swinging her legs around, she hops to her feet and skips over to Shigaraki. Tamura-kun. Tamura-kun, read this. She shoves her phone in his face, then proceeds to read aloud for him, despite the fact that she just told him to read it. Increased security measures. Give me a break. These heroes are just trying to protect themselves! That's disappointing! They're gonna get those kids killed! What about the rest of us? Are these our heroes? She finishes by dissolving into a fit of giggles, hiding her grin behind her phone. Izuku's stomach sinks when Shigaraki meets his gaze, lip curling up beneath his mask. That's strange, he croons, tilting his head. Why are the heroes being criticized? Is it because it's their job to protect? They'll be too busy saving their own skins to try and save you. Izuku's heartbeat pounds against his ribcage. Everyone makes a mistake or two, Shigaraki continues, aren't they supposed to be perfect? Izuku tries to swallow, but his throat feels tight. Shigaraki watches him with raptor-like eyes, pinning him to the spot, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Izuku finds himself shying away from his gaze, shrinking in on himself as he averts his eyes to the floor. Toga glances between them, still grinning wickedly, before she glances to the side and perks up. Ooh, it's back on. Seizing the welcome distraction, Izuku turns his back on Shigaraki to face the TV once more. Principal Nezu, Aizawa, and Vlad King have not moved from their spots, still overlooking the sea of antagonistic reporters that call out question after question. Now it's one particular reporter's turn and Izuku watches as the man stands up from his seat. An arm slides over his shoulders. Izuku stiffens up. He doesn't need to glance up to know who it belongs to. Shigaraki shifts in the spot where he has stepped up beside him and presses a bit closer, very nearly leaning his weight against him as he lowers his head and mutters, "Let's watch them dig their own grave, shall we?" Pulse roaring in his ears, Izuku can do nothing but nod shakily. Shigaraki doesn't have a particularly tight grip on him, but the arm around his shoulders still feels like a steel trap, locking him in place, a heavy reminder that he's captured. On the TV, the reporter asks his first question, catching Izuku's attention. "You spoke of the student's safety, Eraserhead. However, during the incident, it was reported that you urged them to fight. What was your intention behind this?" Aizawa leans forward into the microphone. "Since we were unable to fully grasp the situation, I decided that it was the best course of action to take in order to avoid the worst possible outcome." "What do you mean by worst possible outcome?" The reporter raises an eyebrow. "There were 26 students injured and 1 abducted. If that's not the worst possible outcome, then what is?" To the rest of the world, Aizawa's face remains impassive, but Izuku knows his teacher well enough by now that he can see, even through a TV screen, all the telltale signs that he's annoyed. "The worst outcome I assumed in that situation would be that the students would all be killed simply because the law prohibited them from using their quirks to defend themselves," he replies dryly. Principal Nezu smartly decides to speak up before the reporter can respond. The gas attack, caused by one of the villain's quirk, accounts for most of the victims' injuries. Thanks to the quick response of Kendo-san and Tetsu-kun, the villain was subdued and there were no major injuries from that attack. While we are providing our students medical care for any physical injuries they may have obtained during this ordeal, at the moment, we do not see any signs of serious psychological trauma. The reporter doesn't look convinced. Are you saying that it was a bright spot in this tragedy? We believe that the worst outcome is one that would have infringed on the future, Principal Nezu replies without missing a beat. Can you say the same thing for the kidnapped Midoriya? The reporter asks. Aizawa's eye noticeably twitches. There's a beat of silence. Oh, snap. Twice whistles. Here it comes. Toga giggles excitedly. Of course, his future is the one that is in question here, the reporter continues. What evidence do you have for saying that this has not infringed on his future? What evidence do you have for saying that he has won at all? Aizawa doesn't reply. Principal Nezu leans forward. We know that, considering the events of the Kashi Ward Mall, there has been some speculation as to whether or not Midoriya-kun is still alive, but I assure you, if the League wanted him dead, they would not have gone through the trouble of kidnapping him. We are not just standing around idly. We are currently investigating along with the police. We will not rest until we get our healer back. Izuku's eyes prick. Principal Nezu sounds so confident, so steadfast, that Izuku feels ashamed for ever doubting his teachers for a second. He didn't realize how badly he needed to hear a hero's determination until now. Of course they're still looking for him. They wouldn't let something like this distract them. There's only 3 of them here. All Might's probably busy looking for him right now. All Might. Scarlet eyes burn his mind. Izuku trembles underneath Shigaraki's arm. On TV, the reporter continues to press. Midoriya Izuku enrolled in Na through recommendations with excellent marks and became the first healer in training to attend the institution. During the sports festival, his presence was announced to the entire country, the power of his quirk in particular being emphasized. In the weeks following, Midoriya would be targeted by Stain, Shigaraki Tamura, and finally, the League of Villains. So my question is, do you believe that has put a target on Midoriya's back? Do you believe that flaunting Midoriya's power during the sports festival, an event that both heroes and villains may have had an eye on, was a wise decision? Izuku internally cringes. It's almost downright painful, because, well, All For One's words echo in his mind, but then during the sports festival, it was announced that I had taken in a bright young healer and it all made sense. How All Might regained his strength, why he suddenly decided to work at It's all because of you, my boy. It was because of the sports festival. All For One himself admitted that it was during such a public event that he finally connected the dots back to Izuku. That was the event that sealed his fate. But how could they have known? This time, Aizawa replies before Nezu can. We gave Midoriya-kun a moment in the spotlight during the sports festival because we felt he deserved recognition for his efforts, he says, staring fixedly at the reporter. He works harder than anyone in his class, and he deserves better than to just be pushed into the background while his classmates get all the attention just because they're going to be heroes. A faint, surprised flush dusts across Izuku's cheeks despite himself, taken aback by his teacher's words. That being said, we could not have anticipated the target we inadvertently put on his back. Perhaps we should have, but as you stated earlier, Midoriya-kun is the first healer in training I has ever taken on, so experience was not on our side. Exactly. Still, Izuku grits his teeth as the reporter doggedly pushes on. Many people are still wondering how the League managed to kidnap Midoriya. Were you not aware that he was being targeted after Shigaraki attacked him at the Kashi Mall, an attack that nearly ended his life? His throat itches. Shigaraki's weight seems to press down on him just a little bit heavier. Yes, Aizawa says, and we immediately began implementing security details like sending him off into a remote location in the middle of the woods. The reporter questioned skeptically. Cutting him off. Aizawa's jaw clenches. We had 6 pro heroes and 40 heroes in training, but the league was still able to get him. The reporter says, "Please, enlighten me as to how this happened, because there are many people that would like to know. How did 6 capable pro heroes and 40 hero students that you gave your permission to fight lose one single healer?" Silence falls in the broadcast room, interrupted only by the shuddering of flashing cameras. Meanwhile, Shigaraki is chuckling beside Izuku as if he couldn't be more entertained. "I love this reporter," he exclaims. "Can we recruit him next?" Magna asks, and the scary thing is that Izuku can't quite tell if she's joking or not. "SHH, look, look." Toga waves a hand at the screen, giggling manically. This guy's about to burst. And as much as Izuku hates to agree with her, Aizawa does look like he's only holding on to the last of his patience by the barest thread. He pauses for a long moment, then says in a tight, controlled voice, "First of all, I just want to make it clear that I gave my students permission to defend themselves and that alone. They are not in any way responsible for Midoriya-kun's kidnapping." He lets that linger for a second, then continues, "As a pro hero, you learn that you can take all the precautions in the world, and yet still have things not turn out in the way you hope. From there, all you can do is work to be better. That's what everyone at us strives to do, to be better, to be stronger. This event is something that all of us, Midoriya-kun included, will rise from." The reporter makes a sound that is very close to a scoff. "With all due respect, he is a healer, not a hero student. You can't possibly hold him to the same standards as your other students. How do you expect him to be able to move forward when pros have failed to protect him time and time again?" An indignance that Izuku has become all too familiar with burns his chest at the reporter's words. But when he sees Aizawa's eyes they sear. "With all due respect," Aizawa bites out, low and dangerous, "do not speak like you know my student. Midoriya Izuku is stronger than you will ever know. Everyone was doing their role during the attack, him included. He saved a little boy from being murdered by not one, but 2 villains. If you think he just laid down and let himself get kidnapped, then you're dead wrong. The League may have taken him for his healing abilities, but if they saw his lack of combative quirk and thought they had an easy target, then I believe they have gravely underestimated him." The blatant, unwavering certainty he puts behind his words is resounding. It makes Izuku's heart warm, just knowing the amount of faith and trust his teacher has in him, but it only lasts for a couple of seconds. Shigaraki's eyes drill holes into the side of his head. The arm around his shoulders slowly starts to stiffen. Izuku's mind freezes. Shit. Bless Aizawa for believing in his strength. But he also kind of just blew holes into his helpless little healer plan. Surely he can convince Shigaraki otherwise? The villains think the heroes are wrong about everything, why would they listen to one now? Izuku huddles where he sits, shrinking in on himself, trying to make himself look smaller. The broadcast is still going on, but he stops paying attention to it. Instead, he keeps his eyes fixed on the floor. He doesn't dare look up at Shigaraki, not when he can practically feel the man's eyes on him. He desperately wishes he knew what was going on in his mind. For a few tense moments, all he does is wait, cowering under Shigaraki's gaze. The other villains are watching him too, assessing him, trying to see if Aizawa's words had any weight to them. He can't risk letting them see anything other than the submissive healer they've come to know the past couple of days, so he ducks his head and waits. Shigaraki's arm has been slowly tightening around his quivering shoulders. His other hand suddenly comes up and takes Izuku's chin, tilting it up and forcing him to meet his gaze. Shigaraki's bloodshot eyes peek through the fingers of his mask, boring into Izuku's own, searching for something. Searching for what? After a moment, Izuku thinks he gets an idea. Staring the villain straight on, he lets his breath hitch and blinks until his vision blurs with tears. Finally, a few nerve-wracking seconds later, Shigaraki breaks the silence with a scoff. TCH. He leans away slightly, letting his arm slide off Izuku's shoulders, but he keeps his chin pinched between 2 fingers. A smirk curls under his mask as he looks down at him with hooded eyes. "No, I know exactly what you are." Izuku allows himself to hold his gaze for a brief moment before forcing himself to glance away submissively. Shigaraki releases his chin and he lets out a quiet sigh of relief. There's a knock on the door. "Hello, this is Pizza La. Kamino store." At first, Izuku doesn't think much of it. But then he takes one look at the villains' faces and realizes, they didn't order any pizza. Which makes sense, of course, because they already ate dinner. So why is someone at the door? 2 seconds later, there's a giant crashing sound and the bar erupts into flying debris and dust. Smash! Catching himself against the bar table, Izuku's heart leaps to his throat at the sight of a familiar flash of red, white and blue. Could it be? Is this Kurogiri? He hears Shigaraki snap. Warp gate. The dust clears enough for Izuku to see All Might squat down as Kami Woods swings down through a giant hole in the wall, lashing out with one of his arms and sending numerous, thick tendrils of wood to bind and restrain the startled villains. Another older hero that Izuku doesn't recognize darts in and knocks Dabi unconscious with a swift kick when he tries to burn his way out. "You can't run anymore, League of Villains," All Might declares. "Why?" "Because we are here." Izuku's mind is whirling, struggling to catch up. All Might," he rasps, barely audible. Right after the press conference, Compress says, "Dismayed, don't tell me this was pre-arranged." Another voice comes from the back door. When one is on the offensive is when one neglects defense most. Izuku watches, barely processing, as the number 5 hero Edshot slides out from behind the door and unlocks it, revealing rows of armored policemen. We're not the only ones from the Pizza La Kamino store. Outside, you're surrounded by skillful heroes, like Endeavor, and the police. This is happening so fast. This is happening too fast. Is this even happening? Is he really being rescued? Izuku glances around, dazed. The villains are all tied up. Shigaraki is on the floor, bound, restrained. He can't touch him. Izuku is the one that's standing. Izuku is the one that's free. A sob of relief wells up in his throat. He's okay. He's finally okay. The heroes are here. All Might is here. All Might is right here, right in front of him. Cold terror washes over him, freezing him to the spot. All Might is here. Young Midoriya. He flinches. All Might stands up, eyes roaming over him, lingering on his cut lip. "Are you alright? Everything is fine now, my boy." Izuku can't hear him over the roar in his head. It's like a wall of utter panic has separated his consciousness from the words reaching in his ears. All Might is here. All Might is here. All for One knows this location. He could get here any second. Izuku healed him. Izuku made him stronger. Is he too strong? What if he's too much for All Might to handle? He's not fully healed, but neither is All Might. How could Izuku possibly be sure that All Might would be strong enough to defeat him? All for One has so many quirks and he's so terrifyingly powerful, and Izuku only made him even more powerful, and if All Might fought him now and All for One killed him, then it would be entirely Izuku's fault. With a choked cry, he pushes himself away from the counter and stumbles towards the number 1 hero. All Might. He gasps, clutching at his arm when he swoops down to catch him. All Might. All Might. He's here. He's here. You need to go. You need to go, please. Young Midoriya. All Might startles, moving to steady him. Calm down, calm down. All Might, please, please, you don't understand, Izuku begs frantically. His voice, which has steadily gotten worse and worse over the past couple of days, now splinters into a million pieces, but he ignores the agony in his throat and rasps. He's here, he's close. All for One. I understand. Young Midoriya. All Might tries to soothe him, only to be interrupted by a hiss from Shigaraki. You little shit. Furious red eyes lock on Izuku. Running right back to the heroes. Huh? Kurogiri. He yells, bring as many as you can over. Silence meets his words. He whips his head towards the warp villain. Kurogiri. I'm sorry. Shigaraki-kun. Kurogiri apologizes, grimacing. The Namas. They're not there. Izuku doesn't know what's going on, but there's no time to wonder. Kurogiri can't bring over Namas? That's all the more time he has. You're still green, Shigaraki, All Might says, but is once again interrupted, this time by Izuku scrabbling at his chest. All Might, please, please, you can't be here, you have to go, he wheezes, tears streaming from his eyes as he desperately tries to push him away. It's like trying to push a mountain. My boy, would I healed him, Izuku chokes. All Might freezes, and Izuku's heart shatters. I'm so sorry, he forced me, I couldn't, you can't, please All Might, you can't. All Might shushes him and grabs him by the shoulders to hold him still, but Izuku is nearly hyperventilating at this point, still feebly clawing at All Might's chest to try and get him to leave. Kamui Woods glances at him warily. Is he a danger to himself? He asks, should I bind him too? No. All Might says, gripping Izuku firmly before turning his attention to Shigaraki. This is the end, Shigaraki Tamura. Where is All for One? The end, you say? Izuku hears Shigaraki growl behind him, don't be ridiculous. I've only just begun. He goes on to say something more, but the boy doesn't pay attention. He's too busy frantically trying to think about how to get All Might to leave before All for One gets here. Surely he wouldn't be stupid enough to fight All for One now that he's healed? But Izuku told All Might that he healed him, he didn't even tell him how much, and All Might is still not running away. Of course All Might has never been one to run away from a fight, but this is a fight that's going to kill him, and Izuku cannot be responsible for that. He couldn't live with himself if All Might died tonight. He needs to make him leave, he needs to think of something, he needs to do something, he needs to make him stronger. Izuku grabs All Might's hand, and begins to force his own energy into the older man. All Might must be able to feel it because he startles and yanks his hand away. What are you doing? Izuku lunges for his hand. I need to heal you right now. But you're injured. All Might's eyes widen when Izuku pushes his energy once more and pulls his hand out of his grip. Young Midoriya. Izuku grabs for his hands again, but the hero keeps them out of his reach, leaving him to hysterically scrabble at his broad chest. There's commotion behind him, but it hardly registers in his mind. All Might, please, let me give you strength. He pleads tearfully, please, he's coming, I healed him, I used my quirk. He cuts himself off, choking on a gasp. His quirk. Eyes widening, he digs his nails into All Might's costume and rasps, but he has weak spots. I felt them with my quirk, I felt them. Right hip, left hand, left knee, he's still injured there. You can shut up. Shigaraki screeches. Strange squelching sounds emit behind him, followed by familiar shrieks. Namas? Kamui Woods exclaims. All Might immediately pushes himself in front of Izuku, who gags, suddenly feeling extremely nauseous. To his horror, a burst of black sludge erupts from his mouth, quickly spreading out to cover his entire body. He vaguely notices All Might whirl around and try to catch him, but it gets lost in the strange sensation of being warped away. He lands on his back, hard. Coughing, he opens his eyes and instantly freezes. All for One looms over him, jagged fingers poised to strike. The villain TSKS disapprovingly, now, that wasn't very nice of you. His tone holds only a fraction of the cold fury in his eyes. Izuku pales. Oh shit, he heard? He doesn't have time to wonder how, because those fingers come shooting down towards him the next second. Training kicks in and he rolls sideways, just barely dodging, and the blades stick into the ground instead, a mere inch away from him. As he rolls, he scrabbles at the ground and grabs a fistful of gravel and dirt, throwing it at All for One's eyes. The villain flinches and takes a single step backwards, instinctively reaching up to wipe at his face with his sleeve, and Izuku's eyes drop down. All for One's left knee is right next to his foot. He kicks, That pisses all for one off, but combined with the dirt in his eyes, it provides enough of a distraction for Izuku to scramble to his feet and stumble away right into Shigaraki. Izuku makes another incredibly close dodge, ducking under Shigaraki's swiping hands at the last second. He continues with the momentum, darting forward to land a punch on his solar plexus, but misses and ends up hitting him in the stomach instead. Shigaraki grunts and Izuku tries to back out of his range quickly, but the villain manages to clip him on the cheek with his elbow before he can. Pain explodes on his face and Izuku stumbles backwards, hastily dodging when Shigaraki lunges for him again, giving him no time to recover. Shigaraki swipes, he doesn't punch. He's trying to grab, trying to grapple, trying to disintegrate, at least Izuku thinks he is. He looks pretty murderous right now. Izuku isn't quite sure where he stands with the whole becoming the League's healer thing, but considering they all just heard him betray all for one's weaknesses to All Might, he's going to assume that he's fighting for his life for now. And even if not, there's no way in hell that he's letting them take him again. Shigaraki lashes out and Izuku dodges, spying the rest of the League out of the corner of his eye. Dabi and Kurogiri are unconscious when did the latter get knocked out. But the others are recovering from All for One's warping, far too close to his liking. His heart leaps to his throat when he sees Spinner and Compress Star towards them. Don't. Shigaraki snaps, pausing for a moment just to glare furiously at Izuku. I can take care of one fucking healer by myself. The other villains glance at each other, but stand down. Izuku tries not to show how relieved he is and turns to face Shigaraki. The man glares at him, his blood-red gaze searing Izuku's own eyes. If your opponent is stupid enough to assume that you're weak, take advantage of that. Izuku clenches his jaw. He thinks of all the nightmares, all the times he's woken terrified but unable to scream, all the times the pain in his throat has gotten so bad it makes him want to cry, all the guilt, and sorrow, and anguish, and he thinks, this is all your fault. So, despite the fact that he's trembling with fear, he finds it quite effortless to slide into a fighting stance and meet Shigaraki's gaze steadily. Shigaraki snarls and pounces. Izuku dodges and grabs his wrist, simultaneously pulling to get him off balance and aiming a kick to the side of his ribs, feeling more than hearing the small crack. It's incredibly risky, since he's trying to avoid his hands, but it's also incredibly satisfying and it makes Izuku bare his teeth in a grin. Shigaraki wheezes and the sound is music to his ears. The villain whirls around, lunging again, but it's a feint one that Izuku unfortunately falls for. Shigaraki grabs his arm and Izuku tenses, expecting the worst, except nothing happens. His arm remains intact. 4 fingers. It seems that Shigaraki is not intent on killing him. Yet. Still, the expectation causes Izuku to falter and allows Shigaraki to gain the upper hand. He grabs Izuku's shoulder with his other hand and drives him backwards, not letting him get proper footing, making him stumble and trip over his own feet. Izuku thrashes, punching repeatedly at his cracked ribs with his free arm and tearing at his shirt with his other. Shigaraki grunts and lets go of his shoulder. A brief flash of hope flickers in Izuku's chest before Shigaraki's fist comes crashing into his face. Both the pain and surprise of the punch stuns him. Blood spews from his nose and the cry that's torn from his abused throat is strangled and nearly soundless. Shigaraki takes the opportunity to kick his knees out and force him to the ground. A bolt of panic hits him and he flails, scrabbling at the older man. Shigaraki makes no sense. First he's swiping and grappling and now he's punching? Izuku can hardly read his movements. It's like he's some rabid animal. He's a lot stronger than he looks, though, which means Izuku will be at a major disadvantage on the ground. He needs to get back up. Fear and adrenaline fuel him, giving him strength as he kicks at Shigaraki's knee when he tries to pin him down. He doesn't stay still for a single second, thrashing against Shigaraki's grasp, trying to headbutt him, twisting and squirming every which way. Shigaraki may be pissed at him, but Izuku is fighting for his life as he knows it. Even though he's exhausted from forcing his quirk, the will to survive drives lightning through his veins. Shigaraki's grip slips. Izuku's eyes widen, recalling his earlier analysis of Shigaraki. Using only 4 fingers is practically a handicap. His gaze hardens. "If you're stupid enough not to kill me," he thinks, twisting his wrist against Shigaraki's thumb until he's forced to break his grip, "then I'm going to take advantage of that." Yanking his arm away, Izuku gives him a hard shove back to give him some leverage before grabbing his shoulder, hooking his leg around his knee, and flipping him over in one swift movement. As soon as he has the man pinned down, he wastes no time in reeling his fist back and punching him in the throat. Shigaraki chokes. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku sees All For One raise his hand. He freezes, sitting on top of Shigaraki, exposed, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, unable to dodge in time. All Might shoots over his head in a blur, hitting All For One with his full force. All For One blocks his attack, sending shockwaves rippling across the field, the ground around them cracking and overturning, a torrent of wind whipping past. The force of it causes Izuku and Shigaraki to go flying back, separating and temporarily getting lost in the giant cloud of dust and smoke that arises. Izuku lands hard on his shoulder and rolls to a stop, stunned by pain and struggling to get the breath back in his lungs before he staggers back to his feet with a jolt. The dust clears slowly, but he can already hear voices talking, All Might and All For One. Blinking away the sting in his eyes, he sees the 2 men facing each other a good distance from where Izuku is currently standing. He must have been blown back farther than he thought. "I won't make the same mistake as I did 6 years ago, All For One," All Might declares, clenching his fist and puffing his chest as his muscles seem to swell even further. "I will take young Midoriya back. And this time, I will throw you in prison for sure. And all of the League of Villains you control with you." He leaps towards All For One, fist cocked back, ready to strike. The villain raises his arm, which bulges and sparks with red energy, then suddenly releases a blast of air that knocks All Might back before the hero can hit him. Izuku watches in horror as All Might's back slams into building after building, disappearing with a string of crashes and leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Fear shoots down his spine. All Might!" he cries out brokenly. All For One glances over him and he stiffens. "Oh, surely you know he won't die from something like that." His eyes slide past Izuku. "So run away from here, Tamura-kun, and take Midoriya-kun with you." Izuku whips his head around to see Shigaraki, creeping up behind him. He flinches away, suddenly finding himself trapped between him and All For One, but when he looks back at the older man, he sees him raising his hand, fingers turning black. Panic seizes his brain. The jagged blades shoot out, and for a moment he thinks that he's done, his energy is going to be drained and All For One is going to be healed and All Might is going to die, and everything is over, but the blades don't pierce him. They pierce Kurogiri instead and activate a warp gate, much to the confusion of the other League members. "Now go," All For One commands. "But what about you?" Shigaraki asks. He glares at Izuku and looks back at All For One, insisting, "We have the brat here, just have him finish healing you now." Izuku tenses up and watches All For One, warily, ready to dodge at any second, but the villain doesn't even seem to be paying him much mind. Buildings groan and crack in the distance. All For One retracts his fingers from Kurogiri. "No. There's no time for that now," he says, turning to watch All Might burst out of the horizon. "But sensei," Shigaraki protests, "with that body, I would drain him to his death before he could fix what All Might has done to me." All For One interrupts, "You need him alive. Hurry, you must take him and leave." His feet leave the ground. Only once he's about 10 feet in the air does he finally turn to look down at Shigaraki, meeting his gaze one last time. "Think constantly, Tamura-kun. You still have much more room to grow." Shigaraki stares up at him as he spins around to block All Might's punch with one fist, gusts of air ricocheting from the impact alone. "Sensei." Meanwhile, Izuku is letting out a mental sigh of relief. All for One is not after him, which means he doesn't have to worry about All Might fighting him at full power. That eases his mind, if only slightly. There's still absolutely nothing good about this situation, but at least All Might has a chance at defeating him, now. And Izuku, he needs to get away. He'll only distract All Might if he stays here any longer. But when he whirls around, he instantly realizes a problem. The League still stands between him and his freedom. Their attitude towards him has completely changed. They've seen through his facade, they saw him run back to All Might with his tail tucked between his legs, and they know he sure as hell won't come with them willingly. He grits his teeth, tensing up as he falls into a fighting stance, eyes darting between the villains. Kurogiri and Dabi are down thanks to the heroes from earlier. Compress puts the latter in a marble, but that still leaves Izuku facing him, Shigaraki, Spinner, Magn, Toga, and Twice. He's devastatingly outnumbered, and his muscles are quivering from pain and exhaustion. He's used to exhaustion with a quirk like his, draining himself of energy every day. It'd be impossible not to build up a tolerance to it, which probably the only reason he hasn't passed out yet. But with all that's happened, even he's reaching his limit now. Anger and humiliation burns in his chest, and he can feel the beginnings of tears push at the corners of his eyes. Shit. Damn it. No. He absolutely refuses to let himself be taken again. He has been shaking in fear and exhaustion for the past 2 days, and he is done. He will not tremble in the face of villains anymore. Blood from his broken nose drips into his mouth as he bares his teeth in a wordless snarl. Shigaraki attacks first, lunging forward with clawed fingers. Izuku dodges and is immediately attacked by Toga wildly, swinging at him with her knife. He grabs her by the wrist and twists her away, but he doesn't have enough time to land a punch because he has to scramble back before Compress can put him in a marble. Within the first few seconds, he's quickly forced into the defensive. Even though no one except Magn has a long-distance quirk, it takes all of his energy just to dodge, and even then he just barely manages to do so. The League is scrappy, but they work together, and they're just as desperate as he is. As soon as he ducks away from Shigaraki's hands, Compress is at his back. Twice lashes at him with the most bizarre but deadly sharp measuring tape and drives him back towards Toga, who giggles manically and demands that he come with them while trying to stab him. Meanwhile, he constantly has to keep a certain distance from Magn in order to keep out of her quirk's range. Even Spinner is foregoing his previous niceties towards Izuku and is going all out trying to capture him. At the same time, the ground is shuddering violently as the two massive forces of sheer power that are All Might and All for One battle it out mere meters away. Izuku knows All Might is probably trying to protect him, that he's no doubt distracting the hero, and it makes him all the more frustrated. Toga darts in close to attack again, but he dodges, grabbing her arm as she tries to swipe at him and landing a hard punch on her face with his free hand. Her nose shatters beneath his fist and she cries out, but Izuku doesn't feel a single ounce of remorse as he sends her sprawling to the ground with a hard shove. He will not lose. He will not be taken. He will not be the helpless little healer again. He dodges an attack from Spinner and aims a kick at the reptilian man, who tries to dodge. The kick still clips him, but it doesn't do much to deter him, so Izuku quickly finds himself jumping backwards to avoid his attempts to grab him. In the corner of his eye, he spots Compress darting in dangerously close, no doubt trying to land a touch on his vulnerable back while he's distracted. In a burst of desperation, Izuku dodges Spinner's next attack, grabs his arm, jams his elbow into his back and kicks the back of his knees before shoving him towards Compress. The magician isn't able to get out of the way in time and the two collide, falling to the ground in a heap of tangled limbs. Izuku instantly whirls around, ready for the next villain. 2 down, 4 to go. Pain explodes in his leg. He lets out a strangled scream, nearly stumbling, and glances down to see a long gash on his thigh. Nearby, Toga is staggering to her feet, a crazed grin on her bloodied face as she pulls more knives out of her pockets. Before he can even blink, Two of them come flying his way in rapid succession. He hastily tries to dodge, but one clips him on the arm and the other grazes his cheek, right underneath his eye. "Oi, Toga, we need him alive." Shigaraki snaps, nevertheless using the opportunity to dash forward. Oops. Toga doesn't sound remorseful at all and joins Shigaraki as he pounces on Izuku. The healer scrambles backwards, frantically evading swiping hands and slashing knives, desperately wondering how the hell he's going to get himself out of this situation. His body is screaming, running on pure adrenaline alone, but he's losing strength fast. He can't keep this up much longer, he needs to get out of here, but the League is surrounding him and shit. They're driving him back towards Magnifar wall suddenly explodes. A giant pillar of ice shoots out high above them into the sky, only stopping once it reaches a few hundred meters in height. Then, not 2 seconds later, something shoots off of it, shrieking loudly and releasing bright and flashy explosions. Familiar explosions. Izuku's eyes widen. "Eyes on me, fuckers." Kaken yells, propelling himself through the air with his explosions. Kirishima, Ida, and Yaozu somehow all cling to him, the latter firing off flares and air horns as they fly overhead. It's bright and loud and distracting, and just for a moment everyone, both villains and heroes, stop and stare at them. Izuku can't believe what he's seeing. His friends are here? He doesn't know whether to be thrilled or horrified, because while he never thought he'd see them again, they are going to get themselves killed. What the hell are they thinking? The sound of crackling ice gets his attention and suddenly the world is tilting. His feet slip out from under him and he falls backwards, yelping as he lands on his rear. All around him, he hears similar shouts and grunts as the League members are swept off their feet as well. Before Izuku can even process the fact that there's suddenly ice underneath them, he begins sliding backwards. And he doesn't stop sliding, making bewildered eye contact with Shigaraki as the ice swiftly carries him farther and farther away from the villain. He hears Shigaraki snarl with fury, but the man disappears from his sight and he quickly tries to scramble for purchase on the slippery surface, still sliding downhill. A moment later, a hand on his shoulder stops him. "Get up." Todoroki's voice reaches his ears. He's already grabbing him by the armpits, hauling him to his feet. "Get up, come on. Hurry, hurry, we need to go." "Todoroki-kun," Izuku wheezes breathlessly. The world goes blurry as his eyes burn. "Todoroki-kun." Todoroki is looking at something behind him. He curses under his breath. "Shit. Run." Grabbing Izuku's arm, he turns and starts dragging him away. Izuku stumbles, glancing over his shoulder to see Shigaraki appear, again. The man looks like a feral animal, tearing after them with an utterly enraged expression, clawing at the ice to disintegrate it and make a path for himself so he won't slip as he lurches after them. His heart leaps to his throat, but a flash of grand yellow suddenly has Shigaraki staggering. The elderly hero that arrived with All Might earlier skids to a halt midair and places himself between the villain and the kids. Shigaraki shakes his head, dazed, and fixes the man with a glare. "You again? Not down after one kick?" The man grunts. "You're tougher than you look, kid." The hand on his arm tugs. "Midoriya, come on." Todoroki stresses. "We need to get out of here." "Right." Izuku nods jerkily. "The heroes are here. Leave it to them." His job isn't to fight right now, his job is to run, and that's exactly what he's going to do. He turns and follows Todoroki, and they proceed to put as much distance as they can between them and the battleground. There's a loud, earth-rumbling crash and Izuku thinks he hears Mount Lady's voice join the fray, but he doesn't look back. Todoroki pushes him forward, keeping a hand between his shoulders as they dive into alleyway after alleyway, occasionally checking to see if they're being pursued. Even when they're not, he doesn't stop pushing Izuku to run faster. Keep going, he urges, "this way." Izuku's lungs are on fire and his whole body feels like it's on the brink of collapse, but he just nods and forces himself onwards. He doesn't know how long it takes, But eventually he and Todoroki make it back to the main streets where people are still evacuating. Pro-heroes stand amongst the panicked crowd, giving orders and directing the flow so that everyone moves in a certain direction. The two boys slow down just slightly when they enter the throng, if only so that they don't crash into people. Todoroki doesn't stop, though, grabbing Izuku by the hand and dragging him through the crowd, weaving between civilians and causing Izuku to stumble behind him to keep up. Only after a few minutes of this, when they're deep within the mass of people, does Todoroki finally stop. Izuku bumps into his shoulder and hisses when his broken nose flares up in agony. He opens his mouth to ask Todoroki what's wrong when he sees the boy staring up at something. Following his gaze, he feels his heart plummet to the pit of his stomach. There's a giant screen perched above the train station the crowd is gathered in front of. On it is a live broadcast of the ongoing fight between All Might and All for One. Izuku has to have been running for at least 10 minutes, if not longer. In that time, the two adversaries have been seeming to be giving each other an equally difficult time. All Might's costume is torn and bloodied in some areas, but he's still in his muscled form, which is a relief to Izuku. All for One's suit is in a similar state as his nemesis's costume, but his scarlet eyes burn, even through the TV screen. Izuku shudders. It's one of those moments where everyone watches, where the whole world has its eyes on this one moment. All for One reveals quirk after quirk, displaying more power than one man should ever have, and All Might bears it all. He places himself between the villain and a woman trapped in the rubble and takes a devastating blow that has everyone crying out for him, and he gets right back up again and keeps fighting. Even when All for One's arm swells up to 10 times its normal size with the power stolen quirks, he keeps fighting. Even when All for One rams that arm into his left side and makes blood spew from his mouth, he keeps fighting. Even when All for One shouts something that makes him go still with horror just for a moment, he shakes it off and keeps on fighting. Because the whole world is cheering for him. Can he hear it? Izuku can. Everyone around him is chanting All Might's name like a prayer, like if they shout it loud enough it will somehow give him strength. Maybe it will. Who knows? All Izuku can do is stare at the screen and hold his breath. All Might and All for One are meeting each other punch for punch, fists flying faster than the eye can see. The force of the impacts sends shockwaves rippling around them, keeping all the other pro-heroes away. It's hard to tell who's winning, but blood is flying every which way and Izuku knows that it's not just All for One's. The villain has been focusing his attacks on All Might's old injury whenever he can, whether or not he's figured out that the #1 hero is not completely healed. Izuku doesn't know. What he does know is that both of these powerhouses are on the brink of beating each other to death. This fight is going to finish soon, one way or another. A hard ball forms in his throat as tears prick his eyes. Please, All Might. Please, All Might, please, I can't. All Might catches All for One's fists in a tight grip, shifts his stance, then kicks. It takes everyone by surprise. All Might is, by all means, not a kicker. But Izuku immediately realizes why. Right hip, left hand, left knee. Left knee. One of All for One's weak spots. For just the barest hint of a moment, Izuku is almost glad that he healed All for One's eyes, if only so that he can see the way they widen in horror when he realizes what's happening. The villain's knee crumples, and with it, the power shifts. All Might squeezes his left hand until All for One is forced to yank it away before the hero curls his own into a fist once more, reeling it back and delivering an overwhelmingly powerful blow on the villain's face. The force knocks All for One back, but All Might still has a grip on his right hand, and he's not letting go, so All for One ends up being driven into the ground by the hero's fist. Giant slabs of gravel cracking and flying up around them as the earth shudders from the impact. The vibrations seem to go on forever, but eventually they stop, and the dust clears. Silence. All Might, torn up, battered, and bleeding, stands above All for One's unconscious form with his fist raised above his head. The symbol of peace remains undefeated. Izuku is distantly aware that everyone starts cheering, but he can hardly hear them. Everything sounds muffled, like there's cotton in his ears, or his head's been shoved underwater. He stares blankly at the screen, at the blood on All Might's fist raised in triumph, and he wonders. Is that it? Is it really just over? Just like that? Everything's just done? He's okay? He really survived that? That's All for One's blood on All Might's knuckles. All for One, the big mysterious threat that had been looming over them for so long, the one that held Izuku captive for the past 2 days, is now gone. Defeated. Crushed by All Might's fist. His mind feels numb, like for some reason it just won't work properly, it can't process that fact. He blinks slowly and lowers his eyes away from All Might to the people he can't hear, sees their mouths moving, sees the tears of joy and relief streaming down their faces, but it feels like he's just a bystander. Then, he turns and sees Todoroki. The other boy looks just as dazed as he feels, slowly turning his gaze from the screen to meet his. When they make eye contact, the cotton in Izuku's ears disappears, and sound comes crashing in. He gasps. Todoroki-kun! He exclaims, startling him when he reaches over to clutch at his hand. Oh my god, Todoroki-kun, what? Everything comes rushing back, realization hitting him hard. His friends came to rescue him. His friends, his stupid friends, who he didn't know if he was ever going to see again, who he last saw fighting for their lives against villains in a burning forest, ran headlong into the middle of a battlefield full of villains and pro-heroes to rescue him, no doubt breaking multiple laws and risking the success of the mission, not to mention their lives. God, he loves his friends. He lets out a choked laugh, tears spring into his eyes. Are you crazy? He rasps. I can't believe you came to rescue me. Todoroki looks at him, so genuinely confused that it makes Izuku's heart ache. Of course I did, he says, like it's obvious. He squeezes Izuku's hand, giving him a soft smile. How could I not? And even though he just escaped from a life-or-death scenario, Izuku somehow still manages to get butterflies in his stomach at this. A bubbly, wet laugh bursts out of Izuku's mouth, and the tears spill out of his eyes. The hot liquid causes the gash on his cheek to start stinging sharply and he hisses in pain. Todoroki's hand is immediately cupping his face and Izuku finds himself held hostage by heterochromatic eyes that are much closer than they were 2 seconds ago. His breath catches in his throat. Todoroki's eyes fill every inch of his vision. He can see the different shades of blues and grays within each iris as the other boy's gaze roams over his face. He can see the way they harden into chips of ice, colder than an Arctic blizzard but burning with the fury that only flames can hold. At first, he's confused as to why, but then Todoroki's thumb slides under his cut, wiping away some of the blood. Oh! Todoroki's eyes burn with a silent, protective rage. A protective rage that drove him to disobey orders from teachers, from pro-heroes, and risk his life and his future career as a hero all to rescue Izuku. And now he's standing here in front of him, seeing his bleeding and bruised face, and his eyes still burn. Izuku's heart swells painfully. What did he ever do to deserve Todoroki? Pulling his hand away from the taller boys, he reaches up and cups his face, forcing him to meet his gaze. Izuku gives him a wobbly smile. I'm here, he thinks, it's all right now. The fight's over. I'm right here. Todoroki stares at him for a long moment, as if he's afraid that Izuku might disappear if he looks away. Then, his eyes soften. He lets out a long, shaky exhale, and with it, the tension eases out of his shoulders. And he gently drops his forehead against Izuku's. The greenet smiles. For a while, they just stand there, foreheads touching, holding each other's faces, just cherishing the other's presence. Izuku focuses on the beautiful energy thrumming beneath his fingertips, the one that confirms that this is real, that Todoroki, gorgeous, powerful, amazing Todoroki, is actually here, that he came for him, that he's saved. A hard knot wells up in the back of his throat, and he can't control the whimper that escapes his lips. He doesn't know who moves first. But the next thing he knows, his chin is tilting up and his lips are pressing against Todoroki's. He feels the soft tickle of his breath beneath his nose as Todoroki inhales sharply, and then the other boy's arms are winding around his backhand. They're so strong and safe, and fuck, he's so glad that he's finally safe. Todoroki's lips are soft and dry, but they don't stay that way for long because Izuku's crying and it gets kind of messy, but neither of them mind very much because they're just so happy to finally be together again. Izuku kisses him over and over again, threading his fingers in Todoroki's silky soft hair and relishing in the way his lips taste like vanilla. Todoroki holds him like he's never going to let him go, arms wrapped around him in a protective embrace that he knows no villain could ever steal him from, and it only makes him cry even harder. Izuku hiccups and tries his best not to sniffle as he presses his lips against Todoroki's, pouring all of his relief and anxiety into each kiss. The swell of emotions makes him feel like he's high, but the lack of control he has also makes him shudder to his core, leaving him clinging to Todoroki like a lifeline. After a while, he realizes he's actually gripping Todoroki's head quite tightly, and he's also starting to get a bit dizzy from lack of air, so he abruptly pulls away. Todoroki chases after his lips, but when Izuku turns his chin, he reluctantly stops. Izuku feels a shaky exhale blow against his curls and blinks in surprise. Todoroki is crying too, albeit not as messily as Izuku is. But there's something else Izuku immediately notices. "Oh," he croaks, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." He slides his thumb over Todoroki's left eye. He swallows. It's something new with my quirk, it's being weird, I'm so sorry." Todoroki reaches up and gently touches his scarless face. Instead of getting upset, he just shakes his head, tears falling out of his eyes, and snorts, "Who cares?" and promptly goes back to kissing Izuku. The greenet lets out a muffled squeak that Todoroki eagerly swallows up before melting in his arms. This kiss is a bit less sloppy, a bit less desperate, but no less perfect. They're still awkward, inexperienced teenagers that clearly don't know how to kiss, but Izuku finds himself decidedly not giving a shit at the moment. He escaped the League of Villains, All Might is alive, All for One is defeated, and he's here in Todoroki's arms, kissing him. For once, everything has come to stand still for this one single, perfect moment. And then the moment ends, and reality comes kicking down the door without a warrant. Izuku's legs finally give out and he crumples like a puppet suddenly released from its strings, Todoroki hastily catching him against his chest. "Midoriya?" he exclaims far too loudly in Izuku's ear. "Midoriya, are you alright?" A weak groan tears its way out of Izuku's aching throat as his adrenaline leaves him completely. He abruptly becomes all too aware of the sharp, stinging of his numerous wounds, pain unlike anything he's ever felt before spreading all over his body and settling deep. His muscles tremble with utter exhaustion and blackness creeps at the edge of his vision, and for a few seconds, the temptation of unconsciousness is dangerously sweet. I'm fine, he mumbles into Todoroki's shoulder, clutching the back of his shirt for dear life. Just let me rest for a moment. Please." "Oh okay, sure," Todoroki agrees uncertainly. He carefully helps lower him to the ground, kneeling in front of him and holding him steady. Izuku keeps his forehead resting on the taller boy's shoulder, just focusing on trying not to pass out. The pain is helping with that, actually. His face is in so much agony it feels like it's about to be split in half. He can hardly focus on anything else other than how much it hurts. He unconsciously licks off some of the blood from his broken nose that has dribbled onto his lips and winces when his tongue brushes over his cut. Actually, kissing Todoroki kind of hurt Izuku's nose and lip a lot. Can't say he regretted it though. Blood and tears and vanilla has never tasted so much like victory before. "Where are you injured?" Todoroki asks, gently nudging him to bring his face up. Izuku reluctantly does so, head feeling heavy as he lifts it off of his friend's shoulder. When he looks up at Todoroki, He almost panics before he realizes that the blood on his face is from his own broken nose. It must have smeared when they kissed. Todoroki moves his hand towards his nose but hesitates, obviously, wanting to do something to stop the bleeding but not knowing what. He looks a little helpless. Izuku blinks hard, trying to think through the agony and exhaustion, attempting to fog his mind. Injuries. Right. That's usually his department. Shigaraki punched me, he rasps bluntly, not noticing how Todoroki's jaw tightens. Broke my nose. And, He blinks again, slowly, and looks down at himself. He needs to take stock of his injuries. He knows that's what he should be doing right now in this situation, but he's so tired. It feels like his mind is trying to shut down. Giving himself a forceful mental shake, he pushes through and tries to recall the fight. He clipped me with his elbow too, but I don't think I have a concussion. Togashi's the girl, she got me with her knife on my face, and my right arm and my left thigh. See? Todoroki didn't see them earlier since they were in such a rush, but the large patches of blood soaking Izuku's clothes on his arm and leg are easy to spot now. He hisses through his teeth when he sees the particularly long gash on his thigh. Shit, I'm sorry I made you run with that, he apologizes. "'T's alright," Izuku mumbles tiredly. His head starts to dip back towards Todoroki's shoulder. "We need to get you to the hospital," the boy says urgently, "or the police. Or both, I don't know. Do you think you can stand? Or I can carry you." The thought of going anywhere right now makes Izuku want to whimper. His legs feel like they're made of cement, and he aches to the core of his very being. The ground is so nice right now, so solid beneath him. And Todoroki's right here with him. Do they really have to leave? Can his voice gives out and he swallows. "I'm sorry, can you just give me a moment to rest, please?" He tries not to sound too pleading. I can walk, I just need a moment, please, Todoroki-kun." Todoroki looks uneasy. "I don't know, Midoriya. The longer we wait, the more blood you lose." He's right, of course. Izuku knows he's right. "But still, please." Todoroki hesitates, then moves to take off his vest, which looks fancy and makes Izuku feel a little bad for what happens next because he uses it to awkwardly wrap it around his thigh. The greenet grits his teeth against the stabs of pain that are sent shooting up his leg. When it's done, he slumps against Todoroki's shoulder. Todoroki wraps an arm around his back to hold him steady. "I'm going to call the others," he says. "I'll tell them to meet up with us at the nearest police station. I'm sure they'll have medical staff there, right?" He doesn't wait for an answer, but Izuku makes a wordless noise of agreement anyways as Todoroki takes out his phone. The others, that must mean Kaken, Kirishima, Ida, and Yaozu, right? Izuku can't wait to see them again. He's missed them so much. He was so terrified he'd never be able to see them again. He can hear their voices over the phone now as Todoroki talks to them. Kaken's roaring shout is unmistakable, even through the muffled receiver. It makes him give a little hiccuping laugh, warmth spreading throughout his chest despite his pain. His heartbeat pounds loudly in his ears, making it harder and harder to hear his friends' voices. Black clouds press their way into his vision, and his eyes slip closed. He's so tired. All he wants to do is curl up on the ground and sleep. Every part of his body is begging him to stop. He knows he's pushed far past his breaking point today, and there's probably going to be serious consequences that he's going to have to deal with later. The temptation of sleep calls him more strongly than ever before, a promise of relief for his pain, a respite for his suffering. "All right, we'll be there soon," Todoroki says. "Oh, also Rikugu, put Yaozu back on the phone." No, you'll talk to him when you see him." He abruptly hangs up and glances down at Izuku. His arm tightens slightly. "We should get going. Are you alright to start moving now?" After a moment, he nudges him gently. "Midoriya?" And as much as Izuku wants to just ignore Todoroki and go to sleep, he can't. Because he's not done yet. The fight may be over, but that doesn't mean he's out of danger. He's a healer's apprentice, he should know this better than anyone. If he doesn't get medical care soon, he could die. That's his new goal now, getting to the police station. With something for his mind to focus on, he feels himself going into a sort of survival mode. It's different than the one from earlier. It's not the life or death, fight or flight mode that kept him alive and pumped full of adrenaline during his escape from the League of Villains. It's more like, he knows he can't rest yet. Because he still has stuff to do. He needs to stay alive, he needs to get his wounds treated, he needs to see his friends, his mother, his teachers, All Might, Recovery Girl. He needs to keep pushing forward, even though he doesn't have the strength to anymore. Swallowing back a groan, he opens his eyes and nods against Todoroki's shoulder. Plus ultra, right? His legs wobble like a newborn fawn's as Todoroki helps him to his feet, pulling his uninjured arm over his shoulders before wrapping his own arm around Izuku's torso. Just the mere act of standing is more difficult than it has any right to be, and the taller boy ends up carrying most of Izuku's weight as he helps him limp towards the police station, the greenette leaning heavily against him. Even though it's a slow-going process, people seem to pass by them in a blur. Izuku doesn't look up from the ground, too focused on just staying moving, but part of him does think it's a little odd that no one tries to stop them. Not only is he a dirty teenage boy that's covered in blood and limping heavily, but he's also fairly certain that his face has been plastered across every news platform for the past 3 days. Todoroki is pretty high profile too, what with his father being the #2 hero and his own exemplary performance during the sports festival. If he were to look up, he'd see the warning glare Todoroki is sending to anyone who makes the mistake of looking at them too long. The journey to the police station seems to take ages. They limp down the street at a snail's pace, Izuku tugging at Todoroki to pause every couple of meters so he can catch his breath. The blood loss is making his head spin, and his vision becomes dark and grainy for a few scary moments until he blinks rapidly. Todoroki watches him with unconcealed worry in his eyes and Izuku gives him a wobbly smile, nodding for him to continue. The hospital, he tells himself, just hold out till the hospital. He tries to ignore the way his blood drips down his leg as they turn around the corner of the block. Instead, he concentrates more on keeping his weight off of his injured leg as he limps forward, using Todoroki to brace himself as he hops. Then his mind goes fuzzy. A rushing sound fills his ears and his consciousness floats through a blank, empty space before his feet find solid ground once again. He blinks, looking up, and he's on a different street. Izuku. Midoriya-kun. The strange experience flies right out of his mind as soon as he hears his friends' voices. Kaken, Kirishima, Ida, and Yaozu enter his field of vision, the former breaking away from them all to rush towards him. Todoroki tenses up beside him, and Izuku doesn't understand why, but a second later, the blonde is right in front of him. He skids to a halt at the same time as Todoroki holds up a hand. Wait. It seems to be unnecessary, though. Kaken is already frozen, inhaling sharply through his nose as his gaze locks on Izuku's bloodied face. An ugly mixture of rage and guilt flashes in his eyes and he clenches his jaw, hissing through his teeth as he fights back tears. Izuku winces, heart aching, and realizes that he probably doesn't look too great right now. Kaken still doesn't move. He opens his mouth, but nothing comes out and he closes it with a small click. His fists clench and unclench, the muscles along his shoulders rippling, and his gaze roams over Izuku warily, eyes lingering on his bleeding arm and leg. His hands twitch, and Izuku realizes why Todoroki tried to stop Kaken from rushing at him. With a small grunt, he musters up what little strength he has and pushes himself away from Todoroki, letting gravity do its work and falling towards Kaken. The blonde catches him, because of course he does, and Izuku immediately wraps his arms around his shoulders in a hug, feeling too familiar. Muscular arms slide around his back a second later. Kaken's face presses into the crook of his neck and his chest shudders as he inhales shakily, holding him like he's never going to let someone steal him again, but also like he's afraid he'll break if he squeezes too tight. Izuku closes his eyes and leans his temple against the puff of his hair, wishing his nose wasn't broken so he could breathe in his friend's burnt sugar scent, knowing it would smell like home. After the stressful uncertainty of the past few days, the familiarity of the heartbeat thudding against his chest, the one that he has known all his life, makes tears burn beneath his eyelids. They don't let each other go for a long time. After a while, Izuku thinks he hears Kirishima try to say something, but all that gets is Kaken's arms tightening around him in response. Eventually, though, Izuku shifts and accidentally rubs his cheek against Kaken's hair, aggravating his cut and reminding him of their ongoing mission. He wiggles and the blonde reluctantly loosens his grip. Then, it's Ida, Kirishima, and Ieyazu's turns to hug him. They're all much shorter but no less emotional. Kirishima's ugly sob actually catches some stares from passers-by and gets him a punch from Kaken. Ida doesn't fare much better than him, almost immediately breaking down and tearfully expressing how sorry he is for leaving him to run off through the forest by himself with Kota, even after they found out from Muscular that the villains were after him. Izuku hastily reassures him, tells him that he couldn't have known what was going to happen and that what matters now is that it's over, but it's a bit rushed. He loves his friends, and he's really glad to see them, he really is, but his vision is kind of starting to swim again. It pains him to see Ida so distraught and guilt-ridden. But would it be rude to ask him if they could save their emotional talk for later? Todoroki, bless him, seems to realize that he's not really feeling so great. The taller boy takes one look at his face, which feels like it's probably very pale right now, and decides to get everyone back on track. Let's keep moving, he says, the police station is right down the street. Oh. Right. Ieyazu casts a concerned glance at Izuku's wounds. Shall I make some gauze? He's bled through your vest. Todoroki shakes his head. We'll only make him bleed more if we remove it now. Come on, we're almost there anyways. He moves to take Izuku from Kaken, but the blonde tightens his grip. I've got him, he growls, pulling his arm over his shoulder. Todoroki presses his lips together, but says nothing. Kaken starts to turn, then does a double take and stares at Todoroki, eyes wide. Wait a minute. What the fuck? Half face, you have the rest of your face. Everyone turns to stare at Todoroki, making small noises of acknowledgement. Despite his current bleeding, Izuku still manages to flush slightly. Thankfully, it seems that at some point Todoroki wiped the blood from Izuku's nose off his face, so at least they don't have to explain that. Todoroki reaches up and gently skims his fingertips over where his scar once was. He smiles softly. I'll explain later, he says, let's go. Izuku feels the suspicious glance that Kaken sends his way and decisively ignores it. After a moment, the blonde huffs and starts gently guiding him down the street. Kirishima quickly decides to dart in and support his other side, which actually helps a lot since he's not leaning so heavily on Kaken anymore, and Ieyazu and Todoroki lead the way. It feels nice, being surrounded by his friends once again. Between Kaken and Kirishima, Izuku is practically being carried, which is great because his legs kind of feel too heavy to move now. When did that happen? They were hurting not too long ago, right? Especially his left one, but now the pain has melted into a deep, aching numbness that leaves him feeling strangely cold too. He shivers, a bead of sweat dripping down his temple. True to Todoroki's word, the police station is right at the end of the street. He hears gasps of shock as they approach and then there's some shouting, but it starts to sound muffled again. Izuku tries to give himself a mental shake. Focus, focus. He's not done yet. Hang on. He digs his fingers into the hard muscle beneath his hand in order to ground himself. Bright lights flash behind his eyelids. When did he close them? He feels himself being moved, being shifted. He's sitting now. That's nice. That's better for his leg. Someone is talking to him loudly. There's a hand squeezing his own, and he squeezes back. He blinks his eyes open, because they're probably worried about that. They probably don't want him to go to sleep just yet, and he probably shouldn't even though he wants to really badly. His vision is blurry, and a light shines in his eyes, making him wince and screw them shut again. A voice talks, one of many, way too loud but still muffled. He groans, unintelligibly. Hang on, hang on. He's not done yet. Almost there. He made it to the police station. Now all that's left is the hospital, right? Almost there. So close. It'll be easy now. And he's got his friends with him. He can do anything so long as he's with them. They'll take care of everything. He just needs to stay awake. He just needs to stay alive. He's been doing such a good job of that, for the past few days. He can keep at it a bit longer, right? A piercing wail cuts through the cotton in his ears. More voices talk, louder now. His eyes flutter open. Uniforms rushing towards him. Paramedics. The hand slips out of his grasp. Panic surges within Izuku and he chokes on the heart that suddenly leaps to his throat. He scrambles for the hand, clutching it tightly, but it tries to slip free again. A voice speaks loudly in his ear, the only voice not muffled by the roar in his brain. Izuku, you gotta go with them. Go? Without Kaken? But why? He doesn't understand. They just got each other back. Why would he want Izuku to go without him? Izuku whimpers and shakes his head rapidly, gritting his teeth to bite back the nausea that rises when he does so. He tightens his grip on Kaken's hand. People are grabbing him, pulling him, trying to take him away. Voices are talking, ushering him, coaxing gently, firmly. He doesn't understand. Izuku, please, you've gotta go with them. He shakes his head and tugs. No, no, I can't go with you. Hey, hold on. Someone pulls him and Kaken's hand slips out of Izuku's grasp. He wails, floundering in a sea of confusion and panic, as he's grabbed, moved, lifted, and laid on his back. His head spins and he feebly tries to jerk away, but he's too weak to move. Tears spring to his eyes. He doesn't like this, he doesn't like this. He just got his friends back. He doesn't want to be separated from them again. He doesn't want to be alone again. He doesn't want to face something new and scary and uncertain all by himself again. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to. He can't, not again. He's not strong enough. He just wants it to be over. He just wants to go to sleep already. His breath wheezes loudly in his ears, air tearing its way in and out of his lungs in rapid succession. The hand suddenly returns and he latches onto it with a vice grip. Don't. He gasps, tears streaming down his face. Don't. The whole world is blurry, but his vision sharpens just long enough to focus on Kaken's panicked eyes. Izuku. He shouts, you've gotta calm down. You're gonna be okay. They're gonna take care of you, alright? I'll see you as soon as I can, I promise. No, no. He doesn't want Kaken to leave. But then there's uniformed bodies pressing between him and his friend, blocking Crimson Eyes from his view, and Izuku is being swept away before he can even cry out. Everything is too overstimulating, too overwhelming. Hands touch his face, his broken nose, his cuts, but he can't even bring himself to flinch away. He just sits there, muscles rigid, stiff as a board, trying not to hyperventilate as the paramedics fuss over him. Kaken's not here. His friends aren't here. He's alone again. He's alone with strangers that he doesn't know. He's going into another new stressful situation in which he doesn't know what's going to happen and every decision is going to be on him in order to make it out alive, and he doesn't have any means to protect himself, and he's weak and vulnerable and injured. He's going to the hospital. He's going to the hospital because he's injured, because he escaped from villains. That's right. That's right. He's okay. He's going to be okay. His friends wouldn't have left him with dangerous people. They probably had good reasons for not being able to come. He's sure of it. Maybe he can't think of any right now, but he's sure of it. Izuku lets out a shaky exhale and tries to stomp down the panic violently beating against the cage of his chest like a bird's wing. The rest of the ambulance ride is a blur. The world lurches beneath him, and then he's being moved again, wheeled into room after room, sights passing by in flashes. More uniforms, both paramedics and police. Then there's a sight that he's more familiar with, a hospital room. Things finally stop moving there. Or, at least, he does. People, doctors, they still rush around him, touching him, prodding him. And it makes him even more dizzy than he already is. He closes his eyes. They nudge him until he opens them again. A mouth is moving. Izuku blinks blearily. The doctor is asking him a question. The cotton is thick, but he can just barely make it out. Did he hit his head? Did he hit his head? Shigaraki's fist comes flying towards his face. Icy daggers shoot straight to his heart. He gasps and feebly scrambles backwards, pressing himself to the back of his bed and squeezing his eyes shut. He shakes his head rapidly, then immediately regrets it when it makes bile rise in his throat. Voices murmur around him. After a moment, there's a hand on his shoulder and a prick of a needle in his forearm. His mind tells him. The part that's not desperately trying to smother the wave of panic threatening to drown him. The doctors don't try to talk to him after that. Someone comes and sets his broken nose. The flash of pain cuts through the fog in his mind temporarily, drawing a whimper out of him. But there must be pain medication in the fore too, because the sting fades away far too naturally to be normal. They start stitching up his cuts, the ones Toga gave him, but that doesn't hurt too much either. He almost wishes it would, because without the pain, he has nothing to distract him, nothing to focus on other than the chaotic mess of emotions swirling within him. He feels raw, vulnerable, his mind stretched taut like a bowstring, ready to snap at a moment's notice. The seams are already frayed, having been slowly picked and pulled for so long, forced so far beyond normal capacity. Will it ever be the same again? Will he ever be the same again? He doesn't know, and that terrifies him more than anything. Tears push at the edges of his eyes, and his chest constricts, making each breath harder and harder to draw in. The wave of panic swells, rising to his chin, and he flounders, desperate to keep his head above the water. He can't drown yet, he doesn't want to drown yet, he's scared, he doesn't want this, he doesn't want to be alone. The door bursts open. The sound is loud enough to startle Izuku out of his thoughts, and he looks up just in time to see Aizawa skid to a halt a few feet in front of his bed. His teacher stares at him, wide-eyed. Izuku stares back. Aizawa is panting heavily as if he just ran a marathon and is still wearing his suit from the conference, although it's disheveled now, tie missing. His hair is no longer slicked back either. Izuku blinks, and as he gazes at the man in front of him, he finds his mind flashing back to the last time he saw him. A dark night. A burning forest. Muscular bulldozing through the trees to chase after him, Aizawa taking him down in an instant. Saving him, yet again. Izuku tries to swallow, but it gets caught in the hard knot lodged in his throat. His eyes burn. Can he save him again? Aizawa hasn't moved. He simply stays rooted to the spot as he stares at Izuku, eyes roaming over his face, taking in his taped nose, his stitched-up cheek. Then, the most tiny, pathetic, keening noise pries itself out of the back of Izuku's mangled throat, and he feebly reaches out with his fingers. Aizawa is, at his side in an instant, crossing the room in 3 strides and sitting at the edge of his bed. Taking his hand into his larger one, he squeezes gently. "Your mother is going to be here soon." His voice is softer than Izuku has ever heard it. She got held up because of the evacuations, but she's on her way. Recovery girl will be here too. She's with All Might right now, but she'll come to see you as soon as she... Midoriya-kun? Midoriya-kun? Izuku squeezes his eyes shut, struggling not to push down the panic clawing its way up his throat. He gasps like a fish out of water, but there's not enough oxygen in the air, and his head spins. His fingers tighten around Aizawa's hand so hard he's surprised he doesn't hear the man's bones creaking. Midoriya-kun? Aizawa's voice sounds far away, too far away. The panic swells even higher. Izuku chokes. Is he going to leave too? No, 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 don't leave him alone. He scrabbles and clutches Aizawa's hand with both of his. Midoriya-kun, calm down. I need you to breathe, Aizawa says, steady and firm. Izuku latches on. He doesn't sound so far away this time. What did he say? Breathe. Izuku gasps again, feeling his ribs heaving, lungs straining to inflate. It's hard, too hard, it doesn't work. His heart hammers inside of his chest like a rabbit running for its skin. He gasps and wheezes, a strangled whine tearing its way out of his throat. Breathe, Midoriya-kun. Breathe. Come on, you can do it. Like this. Another hand comes to cover his smaller ones, gently trying to pry his fingers away. A jolt of fear strikes him and he digs his nails in. Aizawa pauses, then takes his hands and brings them to his own chest. He inhales deeply, puffing up his chest in an exaggerated breath, before exhaling slowly. See? Not so hard. Just in and out. Slowly. Think you can try it? Izuku nods quickly, curls flying, and he struggles to focus on the way Aizawa breathes. It's a stark contrast to his own hyperventilating, like a calm sea, compared to an angry hurricane. Izuku hiccups and gasps, desperately trying to do as Aizawa said, trying to slow down his breathing to match his, but he just can't get enough oxygen. His lungs feel so tight. Aizawa is patient, though. He simply keeps breathing slow, deep breaths, keeping his hand pressed against his sternum, letting him feel the way his chest expands as it fills with air. Izuku can feel his heartbeat, pounding against his hand. It's strong, steady, stable. Just like the rest of Aizawa is. It's a clear reminder to Izuku that Aizawa is here, right here, in the flesh, with him. He's not alone. Aizawa's here. Izuku gasps, and his next exhale shudders a bit more slowly. His breath hitches once, twice, then another shuddering exhale. Aizawa's chest expands and contracts smoothly beneath his palms. Focus, focus. He draws in another shaky breath as slowly as he can and then exhales. Aizawa is breathing through his nose, but his is broken, so he has to breathe through his mouth, which is already uncomfortable on its own. But Aizawa gently murmurs words of encouragement, so he keeps on trying to match their breathing for the next few minutes. In. And out. In. And out. Please stop, get back under control. He's not done yet. He's not, right? Isn't he? He's at the hospital, his wounds are taken care of, he's safe, he's not alone. Aizawa is here. He could let go, stop fighting, finally give in and let the wave that he's been pushing back crash over his head. Aizawa would bring him back to the surface. But he doesn't want to drown yet. He's scared, he's not ready yet. He needs to keep pushing back the wave until he doesn't know what he's waiting for, but his fear of drowning is encouragement enough. Go back into survival mode. Force the panic back down. Stretch the bowstring even tighter, ignore the immense pressure building behind the snap that threatens to shatter him beyond repair. Eventually, and it is eventually, he comes back down into his own mind. His gasps and wheezes gradually melt into careful inhales and exhales that slow to match the pace of Aizawa's. The man's strong heartbeat thuds beneath his palms. Izuku's fingers curl onto his shirt. God, he's so tired. Tears sting his eyes, but they don't escape. After what seems like hours of just sitting there in silence, Izuku slowly lifts his heavy head. Aizawa's face swims, so he blinks a couple of times. For a long moment, he simply stares, blurry-eyed and exhausted. Then, "You shaved," he croaks. It's pathetic and not really what he planned on saying, but it draws a huff of laughter from Aizawa that he feels under his hand. Does it look as bad as it feels? His teacher rumbles. Izuku tries to smile, but it wobbles until it falls off his face. I like it, he whispers. It's not bad, actually. A little different up close. Izuku definitely prefers the scruff, though. He hardly recognized the man on TV. The league may have taken him for his healing abilities, but if they saw his lack of combative quirk and thought they had an easy target, then I believe they have gravely underestimated him. He sniffles, warmth spreading through his chest. Thanks. For what? Aizawa asks. For what you said, Izuku rasps, then clarifies. During the press conference. A flicker of surprise passes in Aizawa's eyes. You were watching, then? Izuku nods tiredly. It was really sweet. He smiles again a bit more easily, ignoring the way the stitches on his cheek pull. Aizawa presses his lips together, a solemn expression on his face. I didn't say anything that wasn't true, he grunts, eyes sliding away briefly. Somehow, despite the massive amounts of blood loss he's experienced today, Izuku still feels a flush blossom across his cheeks at the blatant praise from his hero. His smile morphs into a small grin, but that pulls on his stitches even more and out. He winces, sharp stabs of pain stinging his face. Still kind of got my ass kicked, though, he huffs in a bitter attempt to lighten the mood, but as soon as the words come out of his mouth, he can tell it was the wrong thing to say. Aizawa's hand, which is still pinning his own smaller ones to his chest, clenches ever so slightly. Izuku swallows and awkwardly grimaces, glancing down at his lap. He can feel the man's gaze roaming over him, trailing from his battered and bruised face over to his wrapped-up arm and leg, the latter of which is stretched out beside them. A heavy sigh through the nose. His hand loosens, then starts to lower. Izuku's chest suddenly tightens, and he quickly grasps at Aizawa's hand again, this time only with one hand. Aizawa startles slightly but doesn't protest, instead slowly lowering their hands so that they rest on his lap between them. He even gives his fingers a reassuring squeeze. After a long moment, he asks quietly, "How did you get away?" Izuku blinks. Aizawa continues, "There's a lot of confusion going around, and it's alright if you want to save it for the debriefing tomorrow morning because Tsukaki-san is probably still wrapping up with the Namas, but... Did I hear something about a group of students bringing you to the police station?" Izuku hesitates before reluctantly nodding. "Yeah," he rasps, "Todoroki-kun, Kaken, Kirishima-kun, Ida-kun, and Yaozu-san. They rescued me." Aizawa's face darkens and he hastens to explain how they appeared in his time of need, distracting the villains and extracting him without engaging in combat. They knew what they were doing, sensei. They didn't break any laws. Aizawa's brows furrow. His voice is dangerously low when he asks, "Do you know where they are now?" Izuku sighs, "No, I don't, sensei, please don't be mad at them." Despite his exhaustion, he gives Aizawa the most stubborn look he can muster. "I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for them." It's kind of a dirty move. The heroes have been getting so much slack for losing him in the first place, and now they weren't even the ones who got to save him, really. But at least it gets Aizawa to realize that now isn't the best time to have this argument. "Fine," he grunts, "that can wait for later. You need to get some rest for now." He carefully helps Izuku settle back against his pillows, still holding his hand the entire time, which Izuku is grateful for because the wave of panic in his chest swells just a little bit higher every time his grip loosens ever so slightly. The doctors disappeared at some point earlier while he was hyperventilating, but one pops in now to check on him briefly before disappearing again with a nod to Aizawa. As Izuku sinks into his pillows, he feels fatigue pull at his muscles, the temptation of sleep stronger than ever before. But the panic lies right underneath, bubbling beneath the surface of his skin, like a final boss he has to defeat before he can relish in the sweet relief of sleep. He's not ready yet. But he's so tired. He squeezes Aizawa's hand. What's he waiting for? Is All Might okay? He finds himself asking. An image of the live broadcast from earlier flashes across his mind, of All For One's fist driving into the #1 hero's side, blood spewing from his lips. He shuts his eyes and steadies his breathing. "I'd assume so," Aizawa replies, unconcerned. "Recovery girl is with him. That's all the reassurance I need." "Why?" "I figured something out with my quirk," Izuku murmurs. "I can still heal people even when I'm injured if I push my energy out instead of just letting it flow." "Midoriya-kun," Aizawa interrupts. His eye twitches as he says in a very strained, controlled voice, "For the love of God, worry about yourself for once in your life." He looks ticked off at Izuku, who, actually, usually doesn't find himself under this particular sharp glare all too often. He's seen it directed at his classmates, of course, but he's never really been one to get on Aizawa's nerves before. He makes a mental note to never do so in the future. Swallowing, Izuku's sweat drops and glances away. "I didn't mean right now," he mumbles under his breath. "Rest," Aizawa says with a tone of finality. He reaches out with his free hand to drag a chair closer and sits down. Izuku blinks. You'll stay with me?" he rasps, hating how vulnerable he sounds. Aizawa looks at him. "Of course." He pauses, then repeats, "Your mother will be here, soon." His mother. Right. He's waiting for her. Keep holding on. Izuku leans his head back against the pillows and turns to stare at the ceiling. The drugs have turned the sharp pain of his wounds to a dull ache. His bones weigh heavy, as if gravity has been turned up tenfold. His body screams at him to sleep. Fear tells him to stay awake. The silence presses down on his ears, making it impossible to ignore the panic churning in his chest like a swirling hurricane. He squeezes Aizawa's hand again. "Can you talk?" he croaks. Aizawa, to his credit, only pauses for a second before agreeing. "Sure, kid." Izuku doesn't really pay much attention to what he says. What he focuses on is the steady, monotone drone of his voice as it fills the room, chasing away the silence that stirs his panic. It reminds him of his lectures during school, back when everything was normal. Even if nothing will ever be the same again, it's a nice thought, and it helps to keep him calm. He doesn't know how long Aizawa talks for. The man's thumb starts rubbing over his knuckles soothingly at some point. Then, for the second time that night, the door bursts open. This time, it's Inko who rushes in. She doesn't skid to a halt at the foot of his bed, though. As soon as her eyes land on Izuku, she's scrambling over to his side and throwing her arms around him before he can even process the fact that she's here. Aizawa stands up and moves out of the way to give them some space as Inko bursts into a fresh wave of tears. "My baby." She sobs, clutching him to her chest. My baby, my poor Izuku," stares blankly at the cotton filling his vision. Fat, wet teardrops land on top of his